Chapter 95. He never expected that his little sister's first period would come while he was in the crook of his arm. When Upinion came back to his senses, he felt an itch in his throat and his heart trembled uncontrollably. Since Yuxiang had already screamed out loud, she didn't care about her embarrassment anymore. After Lulu finished laying out the cotton blanket, she fiercely ordered, "Hurry and put me down. I'm cold and I'm in pain." Upinion immediately placed her gently on the bed. Yuxiang wrapped herself in the blanket and even buried her head in it. In a low, muffled voice she exhorted, "Hurry and go back to change your clothes. Don't let anyone see you." If they saw her, she wouldn't have the face to see anyone. At first, Upinion didn't understand what was going on. When he reached out to help her tuck in the blanket, he realized that there were some red marks on his sleeves. This was his little sister's first period? No wonder she wanted him to hug her in a different position. No wonder she refused to let go of his arm. Upinion scooped his little sister into his arms along with the blanket and shook her gently. He laughed until he was out of breath. "Xianger, my little Xianger, why are you so cute?" Yuxiang crawled out from the blanket and roared with a red face, "Hurry and go away. It's a good thing that your first period is here. What's there to be embarrassed about? Big brother will stay here to accompany you." Upinion was in a very good mood right now. He had never been this happy before. He had witnessed every moment of his little sister's growth. This kind of intimacy made it seem like she was destined to belong to him. "Go away, don't touch me." Yuxiang was anxious. Her small hands pushed her brother's handsome face away. Lulu was convinced by Master Ho's thick skin and lack of attention. Menstrual fluid was a filthy substance that normal people would avoid like the plague. Why did Master Ho not seem to feel anything? However, when he thought about it, this menstrual fluid wasn't anyone else's but his master's. Naturally, he didn't feel disgusted. From this, it could be seen how much he loved her master. He could tolerate whatever smells and smells. Lulu's mouth twitched. Just as he was about to persuade Master Ho to go back and change his clothes, he saw Tao Hong come in with a wooden box, followed by a little girl carrying a basin of water. Upinion knew that they wanted to help his sister wash up and change her clothes, so he went out. He walked to the corridor and quietly looked at the red marks on his sleeves. It was obviously filthy blood, but to him it was so sweet that it made him go crazy. If it wasn't for his extraordinary self-control, he would have even brought it to his nose and sniffed it carefully. This was the smell of ripe peaches, tempting him to pick them. The window was half opened, and the golden sunlight cast his tall and straight silhouette on the thin window paper. "Why are you still standing there?" Yuxiang shouted shamefully. "Go back and change your clothes." His deep laughter continued and went further and further away. Yuxiang wiped her face and allowed Lulu to untie her belt. She saw Tao Hong holding a long cloth bag and filling it with plant ash. Her face turned green, and she asked in disbelief, "You're going to make me use this thing as a cushion later?" "Yes, everyone uses this." Tao Hong nodded. He shook off the excess ash, then picked up a needle and thread to sew up the gap. Yuxiang groaned. She suddenly felt that she had lived in vain all these years. She even forgot to make a godly item like sanitary pads. She waved at Tao Hong, "Don't sew it. I'll draw a picture and see if you can help me make it. It's not good to use plant ash. It's not clean." Lulu helped her scrub as he begged, "Miss, can you just lie down properly? Don't you feel uncomfortable with the cold sweat coming out non-stop? Wait until it's not so painful before you start messing with these things, okay?" It would have been better if he didn't say it. As soon as he said it, her lower abdomen began to throb with pain, as if a hoe was desperately digging into her flesh. Yuxiang slumped back, groaning intermittently. The imperial physician soon arrived. After taking her pulse, he wrote a few prescriptions to replenish her blood and nourish her qi. He said that it wasn't a big deal, and that she would be fine after lying down for a few hours. During this time, she could drink some ginger and brown sugar water to relieve the pain. Tao Hong went to boil the sugar water. Lulu ran to the front hall to report to the matriarch that she was safe. Because it wasn't easy to announce this, he only whispered it in her ear. The crown princess waited for Lulu to leave before asking in a low voice, "How is Xianger?" The matriarch laughed and whispered with her hand covering her mouth. The crown princess clapped her hands and smiled, "Great. The day of her hairpin ceremony is the day she becomes an adult. Great. Old madam, you should let her drink more sugar water and eat more red dates. The matriarch nodded and ordered people to prepare sugar water and red dates. When the female guests heard this, they naturally understood and covered their mouths to hold back their laughter. At this moment, Yu Miaoqi wished she could strangle Yu Xiang to death. Of all the times to come, Yu Xiang had to come when she was wearing her coronet. She very much suspected that Yu Xiang did it on purpose. The Lin clan saw their daughter's sinister expression and secretly pinched her fingertips. Then they stood up and smiled. My daughter is safe now. Everyone need not worry. A banquet has been set up outside the hall. Please come with me. The matriarch bowed and respectfully invited the crown princess. The 9th princess and Fan Jiaojiao had already slipped away. They must have gone to the west wing to visit the sick. The Lin clan refused to let Yu Xiang steal their daughter's limelight. They praised their daughter's ability and how she managed the marquis household in an orderly manner. They also said that this ceremony was organized for their daughter alone. The other matriarchs smiled and nodded. From time to time they would say a few words, but no one knew what they were thinking. After settling the crown princess, she smiled and went to support the matriarch. When she got close, she complained, "Mother, why didn't you also prepare a coronet for Qi? Today, if the two of them wore coronets and stood in a row, others would definitely look down on Qi." The matriarch seemed to be supporting her arm, but in reality, she was pinching her heart. She asked in an inaudible voice, "When you prepared the coronet, why didn't you think of preparing one for Xiang? If you had the heart, I would have prepared the same thing for her. Unfortunately, you didn't ask. Yandere and I naturally couldn't leave Xiang alone. In terms of favoritism, I can't compare to you." After she finished speaking, she sat down next to the crown princess and smiled as she chatted. The faces of the members of the Lin clan twisted for a moment, but when they saw their daughter politely greet the other matriarchs with indescribable elegance and calmness, they returned to normal and stepped forward to help. In the small courtyard of the west wing, the 9th princess and Fan Jiaojiao sat at the head of Yu Xiang's bed, huffing and puffing as they drank scalding hot ginger brown sugar water. Yu Xiang naturally held a bowl, but because her stomach hurt too much, she didn't have any appetite. After tasting a spoonful, she put it down. "Mistress, quickly drink it while it's hot. Once you drink it, your stomach won't hurt anymore." Tao Hong picked it up and tried to feed it to her. Yu Xiang tried to dodge it a few times but couldn't. She reluctantly drank half the bowl. Tao Hong helped her wipe the corners of her mouth and coaxed her for a while. When he saw that she really couldn't drink anymore, he stopped. The 9th princess licked her tender red lips and asked, "Lotus seed cake, what's wrong? I've grown up." Yu Xiang faintly sighed. This was the bad thing about growing up, especially for someone like her who couldn't walk. She even needed someone to help her change her sanitary pad. That kind of embarrassment wasn't something that a normal person could endure. Fortunately, she had been paralyzed for 2 lifetimes, so she was already used to it. The 9th princess reflexively looked towards her chest, the envy in her eyes clear as day. It was already so big, but it was still growing. Yu Xiang covered her half-open collar and said unhappily, "Where are you looking? It's not here. And it's down there." Fan Jiaojiao drank the brown sugar water in big gulps and said in a rough voice. Yu Xiang covered her face and groaned. She secretly lamented how she ended up with these 2 idiots. She was simply blinded by lard. The 9th princess immediately lifted the blanket, wanting to see below, but Yu Xiang forcefully pressed her down and glared at her fiercely. The 9th princess curiously asked, "What's down there?" "Your period came." Fan Jiaojiao retorted again. "What's a period?" "It's a type of water. When it comes, you can give birth to a child." "Is lotus seed cake going to give birth? No wonder her belly is so big," the 9th princess exclaimed, staring at Yu Xiang's bulging belly in disbelief. Yu Xiang really wanted to kneel down in front of these 2 ancestors. She pulled out 2 hot water women from under the blanket and roared in exasperation, "Do you see? It's hot water women, not pregnancy. Have you seen anyone make their belly so big in less than a quarter of an hour? Don't talk nonsense outside and ruin my reputation." Fan Jiaojiao and the 9th princess were terrified and nodded repeatedly. Tao Hong and Lulu stood guard outside the door and bowed awkwardly to Master Ho, who was trying hard to hold back his laughter. After bowing, they didn't raise their heads for a long time, as if they were seriously looking for a crack in the ground. Go in and tell the 9th princess and Miss Fan that the banquet has already started. If they don't go back now, there won't be any food left. Yu Pinyin didn't lower his voice. Without waiting for Lulu to go in and report, the two of them came out on their own. After greeting Master Ho, they rushed to the banquet hall in a hurry. Yu Pinyin shook his head and laughed in spite of himself. Only then did he lift the curtain and enter. Sure enough, he saw his younger sister curled up under the blanket. Her belly was bulging because of the 2 hot water women. Wasn't she like a pregnant woman who was 6 or 7 months pregnant? Does your belly still hurt? He sat on the edge of the bed. Yu Xiang looked at his sleeve and saw that he had changed into a black brocade robe. She blushed and nodded, her voice filled with unspeakable grievance. It still hurts, like there's a knife stirring inside. It hurts that much? Yu Pinyin's expression changed. He lay down next to her and reached in to push the 2 hot water women away. He lifted her clothes and gently massaged her smooth belly with his large palm. He asked, "Does it hurt like this? I heard the imperial physician say that a proper massage can relieve the pain." "Why are you asking the imperial physician about this kind of thing?" Yu Xiang's face began to redden again. She glared at him with her watery eyes. "It's related to your health, so I naturally have to ask clearly." Yu Pinyin didn't care. He tried to restrain himself, but in the end, he couldn't hold back and pecked her curly eyelashes. Yu Xiang's cheeks immediately turned red. She said weakly, "You're a grown man. Don't you think it's embarrassing to ask about this kind of thing? As long as you can get better, it doesn't matter how embarrassed I am." Yu Pinyin's hand gradually moved down and touched a thin string. He asked curiously, "Why do you have a string tied around your waist?" Yu Xiang's touched expression was immediately shaken by his words. She pushed him away and yelled in a flustered and exasperated voice, "It's none of your business. Hurry up and go away." The string was naturally to tie the menstrual tape. It was one thing for him to touch it, but why did he ask? He simply had no limits. Yu Pinyin didn't know about these twists and turns. He saw that his sister was so embarrassed that the corners of her eyes were already glistening with tears. She looked so pitiful yet cute. He immediately understood that he had said the wrong thing. He hurriedly lifted the quilt to hug her. He chuckled and said, all right. Older brother won't ask anymore. Older brother will continue to massage for you." Chapter 96. Sure enough, she felt much better after he rubbed her. Moreover, the temperature of his palm was just right, so it was more comfortable than using a hot water bottle. Yu Xiang glared fiercely at her brother, but obediently nestled in his arms and didn't move. Yu Pinyin covered the 2 of them with the quilt again. When he saw his sister raise her neck, he quickly smiled and stretched out his arm to act as a pillow for her. His other hand wrapped around her slender waist, trying to pull her into his embrace. Menarche came fiercely, and underneath was a 360-degree leaky ancient silk thong. Yu Xiang lay there stiffly, afraid of dirtying her new underwear and mattress. Seeing that her brother was about to move her, she anxiously shouted, "Don't touch me. What's wrong? Does it hurt again?" Yu Pinyin stopped holding her and rubbed her abdomen instead. A wave of heat rolled out as he rubbed. Yu Xiang simply wanted to die. Her face flushed red as she roared, "I said don't touch me." Yu Pinyin sighed with melancholy. "The imperial physician said that you might be a bit moody these days, and it's true. Good girl, don't throw a tantrum. You'll get better quickly if you rub it." He continued to massage her abdomen as he spoke. Yu Xiang covered her face and moaned. She felt that the ashes on her body couldn't be contained anymore, so she moved closer to her brother's ear and whispered shyly, "Don't touch me again. If you touch me, my blood will flow like a river. Don't blame me if I dirty your clothes." Yu Pinyin took 2 breaths before he understood the meaning of her words. His eyes darkened, and his breathing became heavier. His large palm covered her abdomen, and he stopped moving. The room was silent. After a moment, Yu Pinyin laughed hoarsely, "If it gets dirty, then let it get dirty. It's not worth enduring the pain for a few clothes and mattress. Brother will continue to massage you. If worst comes to worst, I'll ask Tao Hong Lulu to help you change your underwear and mattress." He chuckled as he continued to massage her abdomen. Yu Xiang tried to pry his hand away but failed. She had no choice but to give in. Burying her burning face in the crook of his neck, she asked, "Brother, why are you so shameless today? It's not like you at all." Yu Pinyan's deep voice was filled with joy. "Today Xianger has finally grown up, so I'm very happy. Do you know how long I've been waiting for this day?" Although he didn't say it explicitly, even a fool could hear the passion hidden in his words. Yu Xiang's eyes were slightly red. She moved away from his neck and turned her face to the other side. She wasn't willing to follow his lead and take that step because the road ahead was too difficult. What kind of relationship could be stronger than familial love? Why would she use a love with an uncertain future to exchange for a family that would last forever? Yu Pinyan's eyes darkened. He grabbed her chin and made her look straight at him. Just as he was about to tell her about her background, Mama Ma shouted from outside, "Master Ho, something bad has happened. The banquet guests' dried red dates have been poisoned." Yu Xiang turned pale with fright. She struggled to get up but was pressed back down by Yu Pinyan. He warned her in a deep voice, "Lie down properly. With brother here, everything will be fine." He then called Tao Hong Lulu over. "Watch your mistress. Don't let her run around." Tao Hong Lulu bowed in acknowledgement. Yu Pinyan then followed Mama Ma to the main courtyard. Yu Miaoqi was to blame for this. In order to win over people's hearts, she assigned her trusted aides to the most lucrative jobs in the marquis household. The kitchen purchasing was one of them. However, she had only taken care of businesses like the family Shen. She had underestimated the Marquis Yongla. Although the Marquis household had little contact with the various noble families in recent years, there were many female guests at the banquet this time. It was unknown how she calculated, but she actually made the kitchen manager buy less ingredients. The banquet had only started for half an hour, but the dishes on the table had already been eaten. Aristocratic banquets naturally had their own rules. There were 12 people at a table. As long as there was still one person at the table eating, the empty dishes had to be filled. For these people who had lived like princes all year round, it was very rude to empty the dishes. For the main family, it was very shameful not to fill the dishes. The servants only added dishes to the crown princess table. The other tables had the heart but not the strength to, so they could only leave the dishes empty. The Lin clan and Yu Miaoqi were very anxious. On the contrary, the matriarch was calm and composed. She ordered people to bring pastries and put them on the table to make the scene less ugly. The matriarch especially loved to eat dried red dates. Every autumn and winter, she would send people to the Ganshan region to buy them and store them in the storehouse to eat slowly. This time she didn't dare to hide them and took out all of the dried dates to serve. Large doghead dates were placed in porcelain white bowls and plates. The color was bright and the shape was full. The appearance was very appetizing. The matriarch smiled and invited the female guests to taste. Because the 9th princess and Fan Jiaojiao arrived late, they bumped into the servants who were serving the dried dates. They didn't have time to eat, but first took a few and stuffed them into their mouths. The crown princess was replenishing her blood, so she also ate too. When everyone saw this, they all gave the matriarch face. Those who ate the pastries and those who ate the dates. No one said a word about the lack of food. Before Yu Miaoqi and the Lin clan could breathe a sigh of relief, they saw the 9th princess holding her throat and moaning. Then it was the Fan Jiaojiao, the matriarch, the crown princess. Everyone who ate the dried red dates felt their throats burn and their chests hurt, as if they had been poisoned. Mama Ma was scared out of her wits. She ran to find Master Ho. If something happened to these nobles, no matter how powerful Master Ho was, he wouldn't be able to bear the consequences. When Yu Pinyan arrived, the banquet hall was already in chaos. The female guests who had eaten the dried dates all had painful expressions on their faces. Their faces were full of fright. Those who hadn't eaten the dried dates were hiding in a corner and screaming. Something like, "Murder! Poison! Help!" Everyone was in a state of panic and chaos. Calm down. Blind fear will cause the blood to flow faster. Speeding up the blood will cause the poison to quickly spread throughout the body. Calm down. Slow down your breathing and find a chair to sit on. I've already sent for the imperial physician. He'll be here in a quarter of an hour. Yupinyan's dignified voice was like a bell ringing. The crown princess, who had been through so much, was the first to calm down. She helped the ninth princess sit on a chair and adjusted her breathing. Sure enough, she felt much better. Several maids hurriedly surrounded her and fanned her back. Afterwards, Lady Fan also helped Fan Jiaojiao sit down, trying her best to suppress the anxiety in her heart. When everyone saw this, they all followed suit. The hall gradually quieted down. The Lin clan and Yu Miaoqi hadn't eaten the dried dates, so their bodies were unharmed. At this moment they were hugging each other and trembling. This banquet was single-handedly organized by Yu Miaoqi. If it really was poisoned, the first one to suffer would be her. Her reputation being ruined was secondary. What she feared was that it would be like last time, when she would be taken to the Dragon Scale Guard for interrogation by the cold-blooded and heartless Yupinyan. When she thought of this, she was scared out of her wits. She grabbed the Lin clan and tried to sneak away. Yupinyan had already placed guards outside the courtyard. Without his permission, no one was allowed to enter or leave. He also sent a group of guards to bring all the servants who had touched the dried dates to the hall. So many guests had been poisoned, including the crown princess and the ninth princess. In order to give everyone an explanation, as well as to distance himself from the Marquis household as much as possible, he had to interrogate the suspects in public. If there was even the slightest bit of concealment, the emperor's desk would be flooded with memorials to impeach him tomorrow morning. The mansion of Captain Yu was poisoned by someone who had sneaked into the mansion of Captain Yu and killed so many nobles at once. Therefore, his ability would be questioned by the emperor. In short, if this matter wasn't resolved properly, not only would his official career be ruined, even the Marquis household would be ruined. The matriarch also understood this. She almost fainted several times, but she bit the tip of her tongue and forced herself to stay awake. She shouted in a hoarse voice, "Bring all the servants in and interrogate them one by one. Interrogate them in front of the guests." At the same time, several imperial physicians hurriedly arrived. The poisoned female guests filed into the east room to check their pulses. The remaining imperial physician, who was skilled at testing for poisons, took out the dried dates and examined them. The unharmed female guests sat behind a large screen with serious expressions and listened to Commandant Yu's investigation. If they didn't get to the bottom of this matter today, they definitely wouldn't let it go. The Lin clan mother and daughter were driven back by the guards as soon as they arrived at the entrance. They sat down next to Yupinyan with pale faces. The first person to be interrogated was the steward who bought this batch of dates. Her entire body was trembling like a sieve. Without waiting for Master Ho to ask, she spilled the beans from a bamboo tube. It turned out that ever since Yu Miaoqi took charge of the household's expenses had been reduced again and again. It was unknown how she managed it, but the Marquis household's businesses began to shrink and their business plummeted. She changed the steward, the source of goods, and the accountant. Everyone that Yu Xiang used before was replaced. This made things worse. After a few months, they didn't even have enough to cover their basic expenses. Yu Miaoqi had no choice but to try her best to save money. She didn't dare to make a big move on other things, so she only tampered with the food. Although the Marquis household's dishes still tasted the same, the ingredients used were the worst. A few months ago, the matriarch was clamoring to eat dates. She allocated 500 taels to hire a traveling merchant to Ganshan to buy authentic doghead dates. With a wave of her sleeve, she took 300 taels. Of the remaining 200 taels, the steward also became greedy and took another 100 taels. With only 100 taels left, he couldn't even afford the return trip. After searching for a while, the steward found a very beautiful dried jujube in a small grocery store. The price was also very low. Delighted, he didn't ask where they came from and immediately bought them all. Just at this time, the imperial physician had finished examining the red dates and came forward to report, "Marquis, this batch of red dates should be old moldy dates. After being fumigated with sulfur, they became bright and plump and were sold as fresh dried dates. Noble ladies have eaten too much sulfur and have been poisoned. Master Ho, please immediately send someone to boil mung bean licorice juice to alleviate the toxicity." An imperial physician also came out from the east room. The results of his pulse examination supported his colleague's words. The female guests in the hall were in an uproar. They didn't expect there to be such an unbearable inside story. The Lin clan had previously praised how capable Yu Miaoqi was, but it turned out that she was even greedy for her own grandmother's money. The large marquis household had only been handed over to her for half a year, but it was already riddled with holes and tottering on the verge of collapse. Her ability to squander money was simply 1 in 10,000. She had happily gone to pick people up, but the person she brought back was such a star of misfortune. The marquis household's fate was about to come to an end. The matriarch raised her hand and pointed at Yu Miaoqi, but because her throat was burned by sulfur, she couldn't say a single word. Only the anger in her eyes surged fiercely, and she wished she could burn her to ashes. She was really a star of misfortune. She brought the marquis household to the brink of collapse with just 1 gram. How could she have been so muddle-headed as to insist on bringing her back? She originally thought that she was a girl from the boudoir, and couldn't cause too much trouble. She didn't expect that she would amaze everyone with a single brilliant feat. The matriarch was filled with regret. Yu Miaoqi's face first turned red, then slowly turned purple. If the Lin clan hadn't forcefully pulled her arm, she would have already fled. She had never felt so humiliated before. It was more painful than that day at the Dragonscale guard station. It was so painful that she wished she could peel off the skin on her face, so that no one could recognize her. Chapter 97. Mama Ma hurriedly greeted her. "Miss, why are you here? Are you feeling better?" The marquis household's banquet had been poisoned. How could Yu Xiang just sit still? She sent someone to inquire about the situation, and at the same time sent someone to find Dr. Piao next door. Because she was good at growing herbs, Dr. Piao deliberately bought a house next to the marquis household. When he got rare plants, he would send them to Yu Xiang to help take care of them. Although Dr. Piao was a principled person, he was a top vulgar person. Not only was his consultation fee high, but he also opened a medicine shop to sell the medicinal pills he had developed. The price was so expensive that it made people speechless. Because his master had saved Taizu's life, although there were many people who coveted his magical medicine, they didn't dare to touch him. Emperor Chongkong wanted to take a few bottles of medicinal pills to protect himself, but he had to spend a lot of money to buy them. Now Yu Xiang came to his house to beg, but he refused to give her money. He only wanted Yu Xiang to help him take care of the medicine garden for 3 years. When Yu Xiang heard the servant's report, she gritted her teeth and agreed. Only then did she get the dryness-quenching pill, which was specially used to cure sulfur pill poisoning, and the Bingji Yulu ointment, which was used to beautify and nourish the skin. She also had people boil several pots of mung bean juice and hurriedly sent them over. "I, Marquis Yongla, have no grievances or enmity with any of you. It's not worthwhile to act so brazenly during the hairpin ceremony. What's the difference between such actions and self-destruction? It must be that my servant was deceived by a profiteer and bought inferior red dates to deceive everyone. That's why such a disaster happened. Madams, think carefully. If there were enough dishes, why would these red dates be served on the table? If they weren't served, they all went into my old ancestor's stomach. Madams, you all took the blame for my old ancestor and blocked the disaster." Yu Xiang was really ashamed, but she was also deeply moved. "These are the desiccation pills made by Dr. Piao. Quickly deliver them to the crown princess and the others. Also, don't forget the mung bean juice. Their throats have been burned by sulfur, and this can be used to relieve some of the pain." As soon as Yu Xiang entered the room, he cupped his hands and apologized. His attitude was humble and sincere. After saying that, he went straight to the old lady, who was about to faint, and stuffed a dryness-quenching pill into her mouth. She swallowed it with mung bean juice. "Why are you here? There's nothing going on here. Go back quickly." Yu Pinyin pinched her cold fingertips. "How can I not come when such a big thing has happened to the marquis household?" Yu Xiang smiled bitterly as cold sweat dripped down his forehead. Seeing his brother raise his hand to wipe his sweat, he hurriedly dodged and shouted towards the door, "Bring the things up." Lulu led a line of servants in, each holding a potted plant and a brocade box. The plants in the potted plants were rare and exotic flowers and herbs that were rarely seen in the Great Han Empire. They were priceless in the outside world. Many of the female guests were fond of flowers, and their eyes immediately lit up. Yu Xiang took one of the brocade boxes and opened it for the female guests to examine. He said with a smile, "In order to express my apologies, my daughter has prepared a humble gift for each of the madams. When the Marquis household's matter is over, my daughter and my brother will definitely personally visit you to apologize." The female guests' eyes lit up even more. Their previous anger and panic had been replaced by pleasant surprise. It couldn't be helped. Inside the box was the legendary Bingjin Jade Dew ointment. Dr. Piao's pharmacy only sold 5 bottles a month. It wasn't something that could be bought with money. Which woman didn't care about their appearance? Yu Xiang's gift was simply sent to the bottom of their hearts. After the female guests in the East Room took the dryness-quenching pill, their symptoms immediately disappeared. It was also because they had always liked to be polite and didn't eat much outside, so the degree of poisoning wasn't too serious. Only the 9th princess and Fan Jiaojiao were a bit more serious, but they didn't fuss over it for Yu Xiang's sake. The crown princess also treated Yu Xiang as one of her own. She also received a message from Lulu in private, saying that he would send her 2 bottles of Bingjin Jade Dew ointment every month. How could she still be angry? After she got a bit better, she came out to smooth things over. Bingjin Jade Dew ointment is very rare. How could Xiang'er give out so much at once? She asked according to the words she had prepared beforehand. The madams also found it strange and looked over one after another. Yu Xiang smiled bitterly. "Your Highness also knows how this subject's title of Minister of Agriculture came about. It's only because this subject's good at farming. In order to get this much Bingjin Jade Dew ointment, this subject has already promised Dr. Piao to help him manage his medicine garden for 3 years. It's because I, Marquis Yongla, didn't supervise it properly that such a big mess occurred. This subject's only being a medicine farmer for 3 years is already a bargain." After she finished speaking, she cupped her hands in greeting to the female guests. "If the madams have any requests, please feel free to mention them. I, Yu Xiang, will do my best to forgive myself." Her attitude was humble and her face was haggard. Moreover, as the dignified daughter of Marquis Yongla, she had actually become a medicine farmer for someone else. It was simply condescending to the extreme. Not to mention that this matter couldn't be blamed on her. Even if it really was her fault, the anger of the female guests had already dissipated. The crown princess hugged her and repeatedly said that it was fine. Madame Fan and Madame Min also stepped forward to comfort her. No one dared to put on an unforgiving face, and they all expressed that they would no longer pursue the matter. Seeing this, the matriarch let out a sigh of relief. She stared at her pale-faced granddaughter in the crowd and shed tears. It really was hard on her. Yu Miaoqi had caused this mess, yet she had to apologize for it. Being a medicine farmer for someone else, how could she be so lowly? Yu Pinyin sat expressionlessly in the hall. Because there was a screen between them, he couldn't see his sister's figure. He could only clench his fists again and again. After a short while, he slowly opened his palm and swept the powdered teacup to the ground. The store that sold the dry dates originally wanted to sell the store, but seeing that there were still a lot of moldy old goods in the storeroom, he felt that it was a pity. He thought that after a bit of processing, he would be able to make a fortune. He saw that the steward who bought the dates was dressed well, and was afraid that he would offend a powerful person, so he asked him a few questions. The steward had a guilty conscience and lied to him, saying that his master was just a rich country gentleman. Because he was tight on money, he wanted to make a profit, so he bought these inferior goods. Since the store was going to be sold anyway, the store owner saw that the other party didn't have much power, so he sold the dry dates and went to the countryside to buy land. If he had provoked someone else, it wouldn't have been a big deal, but he had provoked Yu Pinyin. Not to mention going to the countryside, even if he had to dig underground, he would be dug out. In less than an hour, the store owner was brought in with his hands tied behind his back by the imperial bodyguards. He kowtowed and begged for mercy, telling the whole story from beginning to end. After a long time, it turned out that Yu Miaoqi had embezzled the matriarch's food and caused this series of disasters. The female guests secretly lamented that Commandant Yu didn't have it easy. He had almost been ruined by a woman in the inner courtyard. Looking at the Bingjin Jade Dew ointment in the brocade box, they lamented that he had a sister who could handle things, support the family, and go through life and death with him. It could be considered a blessing in the midst of misfortune. Before they could finish lamenting, the members of the Lin clan suddenly rushed out and said that this matter was caused by them and had nothing to do with their daughter. Because her dowry store was continuously losing money, she wanted to use the central funds to fill the hole. The reason why Yu Miaoqi embezzled the household's food was because of her instructions. Everything was her fault and it had nothing to do with anyone else. After she finished speaking, she kowtowed and asked the matriarch to punish her. The truth had come to light. Next, it was time for the family Yu to close the door and deal with their private affairs. The female guests were very embarrassed and left one after another under the lead of the crown princess. As for whether this matter was the responsibility of the Lin clan or Yu Miaoqi, they had no interest in investigating. In short, this mother and daughter pair were not easy to deal with. It was fortunate that matriarch Yu had tolerated them for so long. Yu had long received a message from Yu Xiang, telling her to come home on the day of her hairpin ceremony. Now that more than half a year had passed, no one remembered her matters. It was time for her to come back and talk about marriage. Yu sat in the carriage and hurried back. Unexpectedly, a wheel broke on the road and delayed the journey. When she arrived at the door, the hairpin ceremony was almost over. She walked up the steps and was about to knock on the door when she saw a tall and handsome man standing outside with a hesitant expression. "You are the top scholar?" Yu asked hesitantly. "Yes, I am Shun. May I ask if Miss is the eldest miss of the Marquis Yongla?" Shun Yuanqi smiled and cupped his hands. Yu didn't answer. An old mama that she had subdued in the countryside asked cautiously, "Why has the Lord Shun come to the Marquis household? Do you need this old servant to report on your behalf?" Shun Yuanqi showed a struggling expression. After a moment he finally sighed and said, "No, there is no need to report. Eldest miss, please give this brocade box to Miss 3 on my behalf. Shun thanks you." After he finished speaking, he took out a long brocade box from his sleeve and stuffed it into the old mama's hands before hurriedly leaving. Yu took the brocade box and opened it. It was a jade hairpin. The material and workmanship were very expensive, and it sparkled under the sunlight. Yu narrowed her eyes and murmured, "What does the Lord Shun mean by sending such an extravagant hairpin? Has he taken a fancy to Yu Xiang?" Before she had time to think, she heard the door open with a creak. The crown princess supported the sickly the 9th princess as they walked in quickly. Many female guests followed behind them. She was shocked and hurriedly half-knelt in salute. The crown princess and the others only nodded slightly and left. The gatekeeper waited for the group to walk away before he whispered, "Eldest miss, you came back at the wrong time. Something big happened at home." "Oh, what happened?" "Coincidentally, something big happened at my place too." Yu walked towards the main courtyard. The gatekeeper told her about the sulfur dates along the way, which made her laugh coldly. What was that saying again? Blessings don't come in pairs, and misfortunes don't come singly. Coincidentally, she also had a handle on Yu Miaoqi, and was about to report it to the old ancestor and eldest brother. After Yu Pinyin sent the crown princess and the others away, he ignored the Lin clan and Yu Miaoqi kneeling on the ground. He strode to Yu Xiang's side and reached out to touch her stomach. Yu Xiang quickly glanced at the old lady, then pinched the skin on the back of the old lady's hand. He bared his teeth and threatened the old lady, then mouthed word by word in an exaggerated way, "Don't touch me." His heart's blood flowed into a river. Even though Yu Pinyin was full of anger, it was extinguished at this moment. He withdrew his hand and rubbed her head instead. Then without another word, he picked her up and walked out. He didn't even look back as he instructed, "Old ancestor, you should go rest first. Let the two of them kneel. I'll come back to deal with them after I've settled Xianger down." Yu Xiang anxiously hit his shoulder and shouted in a low voice, "Change your position. It's inconvenient like this." "It's fine. Older brother is wearing black clothes. They're dirty." Yu Pinyin freed a hand and patted her soft and perky little butt. Yu Xiang was so embarrassed that she wanted to crawl into a hole and hide her burning face in the crook of his neck, refusing to speak. In the main courtyard's hall, the matriarch couldn't lie down. She was glaring at the Lin clan mother and daughter in the hall with a pair of dark red eyes. She wanted to swing her cane and beat the two of them, but she couldn't because of the poison. She wanted to use the harshest words to insult them, but her throat was burned and she couldn't speak. Chapter 98. Yu Pinyin stuffed Yu Xiang into the quilt and placed 2 hot water pads on her belly. After covering her with the quilt, he reached out to touch her bulging belly before leaving with a smile. As soon as he stepped into the main hall, the smile on his face disappeared, leaving behind a frightening, sinister look. Yu entered a step behind him. Seeing the old matriarch's unsightly expression, she hurriedly rushed forward to express her concern. The old matriarch couldn't speak, so she held her wrist and mouthed, "You came back late. Did something happen? The wheel of the carriage is broken. Took an hour to fix it." Yu wanted to say something but stopped. She quickly glanced at the several peasant women standing outside the hall. The old matriarch followed her gaze and stared blankly for a moment before pointing at one of them and asking, "Is that Zhongshuan's wife?" Yu tried hard to read her mouth and nodded. "Yes, it is Zhongshuan uncle's wife." There were also several peasant women who were the family members of the old Marquis Yongla's former subordinates. Because their husbands followed Master Ho to the battlefield, they either had hidden injuries or were missing limbs when they returned, so they had no choice but to retire. The old Master Ho was the most affectionate and righteous. He arranged for them to stay in the Marquis Yongla's field, and provided them with 5 taels of silver every month until they were buried. These people usually only came to the capital to visit during festivals. This time they came back with Yu and all of them looked miserable. Something must have happened. The old matriarch felt even more ominous and quickly beckoned them to come in. The moment they came in, they knelt down and kowtowed. "Old matriarch, Master Ho, if it wasn't for the fact that we couldn't survive, we wouldn't dare to ask eldest miss to bring us into the Marquis household. We beg old matriarch and Master Ho to forgive us." "What happened?" Yu Pinyin asked in a heavy voice. The women recounted while wiping their tears, reporting to Master Ho. It was the old Master Ho who said that we should find a way to survive in the countryside. Who would have thought that as soon as second miss came back, she would say that we were crippled and that we were just freeloaders and dismissed us. In order to earn money, my Zhongshuan had no choice but to organize everyone to go hunting in the mountains. A few days ago we encountered a large bug. Everyone was bitten to death. Only a few unrecognizable corpses were brought back. "Old Madam, Master Ho, we can't even afford the money for the burial. There are also the old and young in the family who have no one to rely on. That's why we have the guts to beg eldest Mississippi Old Madam. Master Ho, please give us some silver taels to buy a few thin coffins on account of our husbands going through fire and water with old Master Ho. I beg of you." Muffled kowtows sounded one after another. Old Madame Fu looked at Yu Miaoqi and the Lin clan in disbelief. Yu Pinyin's face was so gloomy that water could drip from it. If they couldn't even settle down their former subordinates who went through fire and water with them, who would dare to be loyal to Marquis Yongla? Old Madame Fu couldn't speak. She raised her hand and flipped over the Kong table. Trembling, she pointed at the mother and daughter pair, her face blazing with fury. Yu Miaoqi hurriedly kowtowed and explained, "Grandmother is wise. Granddaughter didn't know that they were grandfather's former subordinates. If I knew, I definitely wouldn't be like this. It's my fault. I'll give you all the silver taels you want." "You give me silver taels? Can you buy my husband's life with silver taels?" When Miss Xiang was in charge of the household, everything was fine. But you wanted to replace the head of the household that she put in an important position. You picked someone who was used to bullying and flattering people. You actually said that we were useless and freeloaders and wanted to drive us out. Without us useless people, old Master Ho would have died long ago. You ungrateful thing. One of the peasant women suddenly pounced on Yu Miaoqi and strangled her neck. She even spat a mouthful of thick phlegm at her face. The bone-deep hatred in her eyes was frightening. Yu Pinyin and old Madame Fu didn't stop her in the slightest. They just looked on coldly. Fortunately, Zhongshuan's wife still had a trace of reason left. She joined forces with the Lin clan to pull the 2 women apart, then kowtowed and apologized. Apologize for what? Strangling them to death would save me the trouble of doing it myself. Yu Pinyin played down the situation. Old Madame Fu gave Wan Shou a look. Wan Shou immediately went into the inner room and took out a sandalwood box. Inside, there were 20 gold ingots neatly arranged. Wan Qiu handed it to Zhongshuan's wife and said, "This is from old Madame Fu. Hurry and take it to prepare for the funeral." Old Madame Fu asked for a brush, ink, paper and inkstone. She wrote, "It's I, Marquis Yongla, who let you down. Today I will definitely give you an explanation. You should go back and prepare for the funeral. The Marquis household will be responsible for sending off the elderly. The Marquis household will be responsible for raising the children. Keep this slip of paper. If the Marquis household goes back on its word, you can use this to report it to the authorities." After she finished writing, she took the contract from Mama Ma and opened it in front of the Lin clan. She mouthed silently, "Do you still remember the military pledge you made?" The Lin clan was stunned. Their faces were full of disbelief. "Mother, what are you doing? It couldn't be what she was thinking, right? What am I doing? Naturally, I'm divorcing you." Yu Pinyin stood up and said coldly, "I'll give you half a month to apologize to each family. After you apologize, take Yu Miaoqi and scram." Yu Miaoqi was also stunned. She couldn't believe that they were going to kick her out as well. "Grandmother, big brother. I'm the family Yu's blood. How can you kick me out?" She shrieked. All the muscles in her body were tense from shock and fear. She almost turned into a stone statue. "What's the family Yu's blood? This Marquis doesn't acknowledge it. Clean up the mess you've made and scram immediately. Apart from the Lin clan's dowry, you're not allowed to take a single cent." After he finished speaking, he picked up the slip of paper written by old Madame Fu and carefully stamped it with his personal seal. Then he cupped his hands and said, "This matter has become too big. I must enter the palace and ask for forgiveness from His Majesty. Old Madam Aunties, this you will leave first. If you have any difficulties in the future, please feel free to come to my house for help. The gatekeeper won't dare to stop you." Old Madame Fu waved her hand tiredly. Several peasant women took the slip of paper and kowtowed to express their gratitude. When he walked far away, they also took their leave. The Lin clan was still crying bitterly, calling out their husband's name. Yu Miaoqi crawled up and carelessly wiped the thick phlegm on her face with her sleeve. She pointed at her wrist, which was bulging with blue veins, and said to old Madame Fu, "Grandmother, take a good look. The blood flowing in here is the family Yu's blood. My father was Junjie Yu, the former Marquis Yongla. I'm not someone with a different surname. I'm my father's blood. Grandmother, how can you bear to let my father's blood wander outside?" She didn't have anything else to rely on other than this bit of blood. People often miss the dead the most. She didn't believe that old Madame Fu wouldn't have any compassion at the mention of her late son. However, the Lin clan had already used this trick too many times. They didn't have any compassion. Instead, they were mostly annoyed. Old Madame Fu picked up the brush and wrote the word "scram" on the paper. Then she fiercely smashed the brush into Yu Miaoqi's face. Yu Miaoqi couldn't dodge in time. She smiled miserably with a face full of ink. After laughing, she quietly cried. She pointed at old Madame Fu, then pointed at the Lin clan. In the end, she didn't say anything. She staggered away, as if her heart was already dead. Old Madame Fu ordered people to throw out the Lin clan. Only then did she lie down on the couch, both physically and mentally exhausted. Yu Xiang only closed her eyes for a short while before she was woken up by the pain. She groaned as she covered her two hot pads. Yu Xiu lifted the curtain and sneered. "I heard that you had your first period in front of all the guests today? It's so embarrassing." "So what? They're all female guests. Even if I bleed like a river, who can say anything about it? How's the front?" Yu Xiang half sat up. She took out a hot pad from under the quilt and stuffed it into her collar. The blood was flowing out too quickly. She felt cold everywhere. Yu Xiu couldn't help but laugh when she saw that she was bulging above and below like a pregnant woman who was 5 months pregnant. After laughing, she curled her lips. They caused such a big disaster. How could Big Brother let them off? He said that they had to clean up the mess and immediately scram. They weren't allowed to take anything other than their dowry. Yu Xiang carelessly played with her hair. She smiled and said, "Uncle and Aunt were in charge of the dowry. I don't think there's much left now. Mother said that her dowry shops were losing a lot of money, and that's why she wanted to take over the central treasury. She only said this to absolve Yu Miaoqi, but she didn't know that she hit the nail on the head. Yu Miaoqi would be in a terrible fix if she cleaned up the accounts before leaving. Yu covered her mouth to stifle her laughter. She asked, "Is that true? Even if she gave me a few shops and a few hundred acres of land, it shouldn't have degenerated to the point where she even had to deduct a few hundred taels of silver from old ancestors' meals." Yu Xiang pulled up the quilt and wrapped herself into a ball. How would I know what she's thinking? Perhaps she thinks that the dowry has been in the hands of old ancestor and me for a few years and has been tarnished. She wants to go back and wantonly change the shopkeepers and suppliers. With poor management and unstable supply, if she doesn't lose money, who will? Yu sighed and said with a wry smile, "The mess she caused is really too big. She even tricked the most prestigious noble in the capital. Originally, among the 3 young misses of our family she was the only one who emerged from the mud without being tarnished. Now it's not mud at all. It's more like she fell into a cesspool. Do you think we can still get married in this lifetime? No matter how good our reputation is, we can't marry into a prestigious family. Don't even think about it. Find an honest person and live peacefully. From the day I broke my leg, I didn't expect to get married. What does it matter if my reputation is good or bad? I can do whatever I want as long as I'm happy. Of all the noble young misses in the capital, you're the only one who lives freely." Yu nodded. She felt a hard object in her sleeve and quickly took it out and handed it over. Right now she was free, but in a few days she wouldn't be able to be free. Thinking of her brother who was pressuring her step by step, Yu Xiang sneered. She took the long brocade box and opened it. She was immediately shocked. "Where did you get the money to buy such an expensive gift?" "It wasn't from me. It was from Shun Zhuangyan. Quickly tell me what happened between you and him. He actually gave you such an expensive coronet for your coming-of-age ceremony. Do you two like each other?" Yu leaned over and whispered. Yu Xiang held the box in a daze. A thought suddenly drilled into her mind. Before she could think about it, she heard Tao Hong Lulu shouting from outside, "Second miss, why are you here? Shouldn't you wipe your face? Look at how dirty it is." Before he finished speaking, Yu Miaoqi, whose face was covered in ink, had already walked past the 2 of them and stepped into the inner room. Her expression seemed calm, but there was a hint of madness in her eyes. "Yu Xiang, I have something to tell you today. It's something that could overturn your entire life. Do you want to know?" She slowed her steps and slowly walked to the bedside to sit down. The smile on her face was especially strange. Chapter 99. Yu Miaoqi fiercely slapped Yu and shouted, "Get lost. This is a private matter between me and Yu Xiang. There's no room for you to intervene. Little bitch, you dare to hit me, see if I don't tear your mouth." Yu had been a peasant woman in the countryside for more than half a year, and she took care of everything inside and outside the village. At this time, her fighting strength was even stronger than before. She grabbed Yu Miaoqi's hair and slammed it against the bedpost. Tao Hong and Lulu hurriedly stepped forward and pulled the 2 apart. Yu Xiang half leaned against the headboard, holding 2 hot water matrons and watching with great interest. Yu only messed up her lapel, but Yu Miaoqi's hair was unkempt and her clothes were messy, as if she had been ravaged hundreds of times. She caught a glimpse of Yu Xiang's relaxed and peaceful expression, and her pupils violently contracted for a moment. She shouted at the top of her voice, "Yu Xiang, what are you so proud of? Let me tell you, you're not a member of the family Yu family. You're a bastard that the wet nurse brought in by mistake. Don't you think it's strange that we don't look the least bit alike? We're not twins, we're not related by blood." She concealed the fact that the Shin family was ruined, and that Shin Yuanqi was the top scholar, and told her everything that had happened that year by a freak combination of factors. Because she deliberately publicized it, not only did the people in the room hear it clearly, even the servants passing by heard it without missing a word. Tao Hong and Lulu were completely stunned. Yu saw that Yu Xiang's head was lowered, and she couldn't see her expression, so she quickly sat down and put her arm around her shoulders. She wanted to comfort her, but she didn't know where to start. Yu Miaoqi was still unwilling to give up. She pointed to the extremely luxurious jewelry on the dressing table and coldly said, "These should be mine," pointing to the priceless antiques on the shelf. "These should be mine." She pushed open the window and pointed to the beautiful fairyland courtyard. These should also be mine, everything you have should belong to me. The one who should leave is you, not me. Only then did Yu Xiang slowly raise his head. There was no tears or snot on his face like what others had imagined. Instead, there was a calm and contemptuous look on his face. Family Yu's blood flows in your veins. So what? The old ancestor and big brother didn't care about that. It's your own fault that they want to chase you away. What does it have to do with me? Why are you looking for me? Someone come. Throw her out. The maids in the courtyard didn't move. Even Tao Hong and Lulu stood there in a daze. Yu Miaoqi couldn't help but laugh. This was exactly the effect she wanted. Yu Xiang could only act like a tyrant because she was the legitimate daughter of the Marquis family. Without this title, how could she act like a tyrant? In the end, she was just a bastard of unknown origin. Yu Xiang frowned. She was really angry. Yu Xiu roared, "What are you waiting for? Hurry up and kick Yu Miaoqi out. Don't forget whose territory this is." Only then did Tao Hong and Lulu come back to their senses. They went forward to pull Yu Miaoqi away. The servants outside the courtyard still didn't dare to act rashly. They had the intention of watching. Just at this time, Mama Ma heard the news and rushed over in a hurry. Yu Miaoqi slapped Tao Hong and Lulu away. Seeing that Mama Ma had arrived, she laughed instead. She walked to the washstand by the window and slowly washed her face with the water in the copper basin. She said word by word, "Go back and tell the old madam not to be too biased. It's fine if you kick me out, but be careful that I don't break the pot and announce Yu Xiang's identity. Your Marquis family abandoned your legitimate bloodline, and instead pampered a bastard like a precious treasure. What kind of logic is this? There's no such cold-blooded family in this world." Mama Ma naturally knew how much the old madam and Master Ho doted on Miss Xiang. If Yu Miaoqi really did make a big deal out of it, wouldn't Miss Xiang be tortured to death in the future after offending so many noble maidens? She couldn't stay in the capital any longer. While she was hesitating, Yu Miaoqi straightened up and took a towel hanging from the shelf to wipe her face. She then sat in front of the dressing table and put on Yu Xiang's jade lotus crown on her head. She looked left and right in front of the mercury mirror and said arrogantly, "Go back and tell grandmother that if you destroy me, you'll destroy Yu Xiang. If she wants to seal my mouth, she'll have to give me this courtyard." She turned around and smiled faintly at Yu Xiang and Yu Xiu, who had ugly expressions on their faces. Yu Xiang already knew that Yu Miaoqi would have the absolute advantage if she revealed her identity, but she didn't expect this day to come so early. She struggled between leaving and staying. Finally, she asked in a low voice, "What about my family? Where are they?" She had to get to the bottom of this no matter what. Yu Miaoqi's eyes flashed. Just as she was about to speak, Mama Feng came in with many sturdy maidservants. Mama Feng bowed and replied in a manner that was neither servile nor overbearing, reporting to Miss Xiang, "This servant is here on Master Ho's orders to help Miss move. This courtyard is already dirty and can't be lived in." "Move to where?" Yu Xiang was so surprised that the hot water bottle in her arms fell to the ground. "Move to Jingfu Courtyard. This servant has already cleaned up the courtyard. You only need to move your things over and you can live there." As Mama Feng spoke, she took off Yu Miaoqi's hairpin and placed it in a box before handing it to the maidservant behind her. She then ordered the servants to move all the antique furniture, remove all the curtains and bed curtains, and remove all the exotic flowers and plants outside the courtyard that could be removed. The giant trees that couldn't be removed had to be left behind. Jingfu Courtyard was only a wall away from Yu Pinyan's study, and it occupied an area as big as two Shi Xiang's rooms. Mama Feng cleaned it up in such a short time. It was clear that Yu Pinyan had already instructed her to do so. The servants moved very quickly. In less than a quarter of an hour, the room was emptied, leaving behind a dumbfounded Yu Miaoqi and a snickering Yu Xiu. "Second miss, as you wish, this courtyard is yours from now on. Master Ho has said that if you want to continue to be the legitimate daughter of the Marquis household, then you should keep your mouth shut." Mama Feng bowed slightly and pushed Yu Xiang out the door. Yu Xiu hurriedly followed. What was this? She was dismissed just like that? Yu Miaoqi stood up and walked 2 steps forward in a daze. It was said that one should refrain from shooting at the rat for fear of breaking the vases. She never expected that her direct descendant of the prefecture Yu bloodline would become the rat that everyone wanted to beat. Yu Xiang was a priceless treasure. This family actually trampled on her to this extent. As she thought this, her eyes were gradually dyed with a crazy murderous intent. Yu Xiang felt something and raised her hand to signal Mama Feng to stop. She turned around and pointed at the washstand saying, "I almost forgot, Yu Miaoqi. The water and towel you used to wash your face were all leftovers from when I took care of that." She looked at her abdomen and said in a light tone full of malice, "Do you understand?" Everyone was speechless. Yu Miaoqi's eyes widened until they were bigger than copper bells, as if she had seen a demon or a ghost. Yu Xiang chuckled and signaled Mama Feng to continue walking. After a few steps, she heard the sound of sobbing and vomiting behind her. After Yu Xiang settled down in Jingfu courtyard, Yu Xiyu was still in a state of hysterical laughter. "Oh my god, Yu Xiang, you're so mean. I think Yu Miaoqi won't be able to eat for a few days." After laughing, she sighed and said, "Our marquee household has been ruined by her. We don't have any reputation left. I'm afraid that no one will dare to come to our banquets in the future." Yu Xiang was drawing the design of a sanitary pad and a bra. She said casually, "Don't you know? Before this, our marquee Yongla was the most unruly household in the capital. It doesn't matter if our reputation is a bit worse. It's just that we still need to compensate for what needs to be compensated. If we don't have to make enemies, then we won't make enemies. It's best to maintain a distance between us and the other families." Yu Xiyu nodded and said hesitantly, "Now that you know about your background, what do you plan to do in the future?" Yu Miaoqi said it so loudly that it must have spread throughout the residence by now. Before, it was Yu Miaoqi's housekeeper, so the rules have long been messed up. There must be servants who trample on the weak and flatter the strong. Yu Xiang sneered and interrupted her. "Even if I'm not the legitimate daughter of Prefecture Yu, I'm not a stepping stone that anyone can step on. Who wants to step on you?" A cold voice came from outside the door. The two turned to look and saw that it was Yu Pinyin, who was travel-worn. Yu Miaoqi hurriedly stood up and bowed, asking, "Big brother, what did His Majesty say?" Yu Pinyin didn't answer and walked straight to Yu Xiang's side. He bent down to rub her stomach and asked again in a low voice, "Who wants to step on you? Tell Big Brother. Big Brother will chop him up immediately." His large hand was about to reach under her clothes to lift her undergarments. Yu Xiang tried hard to control her face from turning red. She grabbed his wrist and hurriedly said, "No one wants to bully me. We're just making assumptions. Big Brother, what did His Majesty say?" Yu Pinyin sat down next to her. He saw that a fire cage had been lit in the room and a table had been set on top of it with a brocade quilt. He immediately pulled the quilt over and carefully covered her legs. He slowly answered, "His Majesty ordered me to reflect on myself for half a month and also bestowed 4 mamas to train Yu Miaoqi. Since His Majesty had bestowed mamas, Yu Miaoqi couldn't leave." Yu Xiyu was a bit disappointed. However, Yu Xiang wasn't surprised at all. As soon as Yu Miaoqi announced her identity, Mama Feng came. She even cleaned up Jingfu courtyard and waited for her to move in. She couldn't help but suspect that Yu Miaoqi's every move was within Big Brother's calculations. He wanted to tear apart the layer of paper between siblings, but he wasn't willing to be the bad guy in front of her, so he simply used Yu Miaoqi. To be honest, Yu Xiang was a bit angry, but more than that, she was afraid of the unknown future. Perhaps because she was born unable to walk, her temperament was like a tree. Wherever it took root, it would find a hole. If one day someone wanted to pull it out of the hole and transplant it to another place, it was possible that she would blossom, and it was even more likely that she would slowly wither because she could not adapt to the environment. Did she love Yu Pinyin? Of course she did. Whether this love was familial or romantic, it didn't make any difference to her. She just couldn't accept the sudden change. Sibling love could last a lifetime, but could husband and wife love? Especially in this era of polygamy. She was afraid that one day, all her love for Yu Pinyin would turn into hatred. When that time came, what would she use to live? Moreover, there was still the old ancestor between them. The old ancestor doted on her like she was her own granddaughter. In her eyes, whether they were related by blood or not, it was incest and could not be tolerated in the world. The more she doted on her now, the more she would hate her after she found out the truth. She would probably want her to disappear forever. Chapter 100. Pinyin sensed his sister's resistance, but he didn't care. He stuffed a hot water bottle into her arms. He felt that the hot water bottle was a bit cold, so he personally went to the side room next door to fill it with hot water. Yu smiled and said, "Big brother still dotes on you. With big brother protecting you, what can you Miaoqi do? It's getting late. I should go back." She looked at the golden clouds outside the window. Yu quickly pulled her back. "It's getting late. You should stay for dinner." After saying that, he hurriedly waved at Tao Hong. "Go to the kitchen and see if dinner is ready." Tao Hong agreed crisply. As he walked on the road, he felt that all the servants were quietly sizing him up. He couldn't help but curse angrily, "A bunch of bastards, what are you looking at? So what if our young miss isn't of Prefecture U blood? Our young miss has been in Prefecture U for 15 years, and has the deepest relationship with the old lady and Master Ho. Second young miss is back, but the old lady and Master Ho don't side with her and not our young Mississippi. You bunch of bastards, now you want to torture our young miss, right? Let me tell you, Master Ho said that whoever dares to disrespect our young miss will be chopped into minced meat. Try it if you have the guts." Who was sneaking glances at me just now? Busy Jinling, old Li. I'll remember you guys. Be careful. When everyone heard this, they immediately slipped away. They wished they could stuff their heads into their pants. Thinking about it, although Miss 3 wasn't biological, her relationship with Master Ho and the old lady couldn't be faked. Although second young miss took the small courtyard in the west wing, Master Ho gave the small courtyard next to his study to Miss 3 in the blink of an eye. Wasn't it obvious who was favored and who wasn't? With this thought in mind, no one dared to have any other thoughts. When Tao Hong arrived at the kitchen, the steward in charge of purchasing food had already been beaten to death. The current steward was the one that Yu Xiang had put in an important position. When he saw Tao Hong, he was very enthusiastic and hurriedly placed more than a dozen exquisite dishes into the food boxes. Yu Pinyin returned after pouring the hot water. Hearing that Yu Xiang was urging them to eat, she seemed to remember something and turned around to leave. Not long after, she pushed the door open and entered with a box. "What's that smell?" Yu Xiang pinched the tip of his nose. Yu couldn't help but frown. When the box was open, the pungent smell of Chinese medicine became even stronger. It was a little sour, a little spicy, and a little strange. When mixed together, it was enough to make people faint. Yu Xiang hid far away and poked his head out to take a look. He saw 12 black pills the size of pigeon eggs neatly arranged in the box. "What is this? It's not for me, is it?" She had an ominous premonition. "These are Wuji Baifeng pills that I got from Dr. Piao. They are specially used to treat menstrual cramps. Take one before meals every day." As Yu Pinyin spoke, he picked up a pill and fed it to his sister. He was half coaxing and half threatening, "Xiang, be good and eat it quickly. Dr. Piao said that you need to treat this problem as soon as possible. Otherwise, it will be more painful every month. If you don't want to eat it, that's fine. Big brother will help you rub it." After saying this, he pretended to touch her abdomen. Yu was sitting across from him. How could Yu Xiang dare to let him touch her? She knitted her eyebrows and took a bite. Then she revealed an expression that looked like she was about to vomit. Yu pinched her nose and turned her head away. She couldn't bear to look. In her heart, she was envious of Yu Pinyin's love for Yu Xiang. In the entire Great Han dynasty, which elder brother would deliberately consult a doctor for his sister's menstrual cramps? To be able to do this, it could be seen that her elder brother really loved Yu Xiang to the bone. However, Yu Xiang had used her legs in exchange for this. She had already thought it through. Although she was envious, she was not as unwilling as before. How could Yu Pinyin let her vomit? He didn't care that it was dirty. He immediately covered her mouth with his hand and ordered, "Swallow it. After you vomit it all out, Big Brother will let you eat more until you eat enough. Long or short pain you can choose for yourself." Long pain was better than short pain. Yu Xiang held back her tears and swallowed the strange taste in her mouth. When she saw her elder brother reach out his hand again, she closed her eyes and fiercely bit down. Not only did she bite the pill, but she also bit down on his fingertip. Then she used her tongue to force it out. Yu Pinyin wanted nothing more than to press her down on the table and suck on her crazily. However, he didn't show it on his face. He stroked her cheek and praised in a hoarse voice, "Good girl, drink some honey water." Only then did Yu Xiang realize that he had even prepared the honey water. She hurriedly picked it up and gulped it down. The overflowing water flowed down her delicate chin, into her collar, and finally into her full and white chest. Yu Pinyin's eyes darkened for a moment. When she finished drinking, he took out a handkerchief and wiped her chin and neck clean. He stopped at her collarbone for a moment before slowly retracting his hand. If it was in the past, Yu Xiang would have pretended not to know. However, right now Yu Pinyin was like a hungry beast. He had already lost interest in teasing his prey and was only waiting to devour her. Previously, he still knew how to restrain himself. When he teased her to the critical point, he would pull away at the right time. However, after Yu Miaoqi exposed their so-called sibling relationship, he didn't hide his gaze anymore. It was so hot that it could set her on fire. His body exuded a strong and seductive masculinity. Yu Xiang's ears were secretly dyed red and her temperature was boiling. Yu Pinyin suddenly leaned over and pinched her round and cute earlobes. He seemed to be very satisfied with the heat from his fingertips and chuckled softly. Yu Xiang was at her most sensitive moment. When she heard his hoarse and sexy laughter, her lower abdomen twitched. She sternly asked, "What are you laughing at? Am I that funny? My stomach hurts like a knife and you can still laugh. You're too cruel." This accusation was simply unreasonable. Yu turned her entire body around and pretended to seriously admire the lotus pond outside the window that was already full of withered branches and withered leaves. Yu Pinyin immediately restrained his smile. He wrapped his arm around Yu Xiang's thin shoulders and pulled her into his embrace. He said in a loving tone, "Dr. Piao said that your temper might be more irritable in the near future. Sure enough, it's true. All right, big brother won't laugh anymore. Look at your little mouth. It's big enough to hang several oil bottles on." As he spoke, he reached out to pinch his sister's pouty lips. Yu Xiang tilted her head to avoid him. Her large and round eyes were moist. She thought she was fierce, but she was actually tender as she glared at her brother. Yu Pinyin's entire body went numb from her glare. If Yu wasn't still there, he would have already pulled her into his embrace and rubbed her. Yu quickly glanced at the two of them. She suddenly realized that her brother, who was cold and ruthless and invincible in her heart, could also talk and laugh like an ordinary person. Not long after, Tao Hong came in with a lunchbox. He placed the dishes on the table and Lulu helped to scoop out the rice. "Take away this spicy diced chicken." Yu Pinyin pointed at one of the bowls and plates. "But this is Master Ho's favorite dish." Lulu hesitated. "Xianger can't eat spicy food right now. Do you want to leave it here for her to covet?" Yu Pinyin pointed at a plate of stir-fried bamboo shoots with sliced meat. "Take away this too." Yu Xiang hurriedly pressed down on the bowl with her chopsticks. "No, I love bamboo shoots the most. There's no chili in this dish. Why should we take it away? Fresh bamboo shoots are cold in nature. You can't eat them right now. Take them away." Yu Pinyin pushed away her chopsticks and ordered Tao Hong and Lulu to take away the dishes. He carefully instructed, "You can't eat spicy or cold food right now. For example, hawthorn, pickled cabbage, winter bamboo shoots, chili, crab, snail and other things. Forget it. You won't remember even if I told you. I have a list here. Lulu, take it to the kitchen and ask the cook to pay attention to it. Oh right, there's also milk. Xianger can't drink milk these days. Otherwise, it will cause more severe abdominal pain." He took out a list from his sleeve pocket and handed it to Lulu. Then, he tasted all the dishes and pointed at a few of them. He had them taken away. "These dishes are very bland. Why did you take them away? You might as well let me drink the northwest wind." Yu Xiang slammed her chopsticks on the table and glared at her brother. Yu was so scared that she almost lost her grip on her bowl. "There's too much salt in these dishes. It's easy to cause edema and headaches. Be good and bear with it for a few days. When you're better, you can eat whatever you want. Brother won't stop you." Yu Pinyin pinched the tip of her nose. Yu Xiang's pale cheeks gradually turned red. She asked fiercely, "How do you know so much about it? Did Dr. Piao tell you everything? You're a man, but you're asking so many questions about a girl's private matters. Don't you feel embarrassed?" She covered her face as if she felt ashamed for him. Yu shrunk her shoulders and struggled between leaving or not. Yu Pinyin laughed in a deep voice. "Why should I be embarrassed when it concerns your health? Do you think it's interesting to see you in pain every month? The dishes are cold. Hurry up and eat. If you continue to make trouble, I'll force you to eat." He picked up his sister's bowl, picked up some stir-fried cabbage with his chopsticks, and pretended to feed her. In the past, Yuxiang didn't think much of feeding each other. Now she felt her blood flow in reverse and her cheeks were burning hot. She hurriedly waved her hands to refuse and obediently ate in silence. Yu Pinyin was finally satisfied. He helped her pick up food with his chopsticks and reminded her to eat slowly so that she wouldn't choke. The atmosphere between the two of them was too strange. The air seemed to be filled with the smell of smoke and honey. Yu sat on pins and needles. She quickly finished her meal and bid farewell to her brother. Before she left, she received an appreciative look from him. After she walked away, Yu Pinyin put down his bowl and chopsticks and said with certainty, "You knew about your identity a long time ago?" Otherwise, with Xiang Er's fiery temper, she would have torn down the small courtyard in the west wing along with Yu Miaoqi. Yu Xiang stiffened and slowly nodded. She had been troubled by her relationship problems and had forgotten about this matter. Yu Pinyin stared at her and asked again, "When did you know?" Yu Xiang naturally couldn't tell him that she knew when she opened her eyes 5 years ago. She vaguely said, "Not long after she came back." Yu Pinyin didn't pursue the matter. He picked her up and sat her on his lap. He got straight to the point and said, "We're not biological siblings. Do you have anything to say to me?" Yu Xiang struggled for a long time before she asked expectantly, Can you continue to be my brother?" Tao Hong and Lulu unconsciously held their breaths. Master Ho's answer would determine whether their master could continue to stay in Marquis Yongla. If Master Ho's answer was negative, at least half of the noble maidens in the capital would think of ways to humiliate her and take revenge on her. Their master's mouth was too hateful. Chapter 101. Yu Xiang held back for a moment, but in the end, she couldn't help but turn her head and cry silently. Tao Hong and Lulu's shoulders slumped, and their hearts were filled with endless despair. Yu Pinyin sighed deeply and pressed hard on his sister's soft buttocks, making her feel the hardness between his legs. "Let me ask you, which brother in the world can't help but kiss his sister? Which brother in the world wants to possess his sister in his dreams every night? Which brother in the world wants to marry his sister? We've already come to this point and you still want me to be your brother. How can I be satisfied?" Yu Xiang's ears were so red that they were dripping blood. She stubbornly tilted her head and refused to look at him, or rather, she didn't dare to look at him. Her constantly trembling eyelashes revealed the panic in her heart. Tao Hong screamed in shock, and Lulu hurriedly covered her wide-open mouth and hurriedly dragged her out. Yu Pinyin waited until everyone had left before he grabbed his sister's chin and forced her to look at him. "Xiang'er, I don't want to be your brother anymore. I want to be your husband. You're already of marriageable age, so let's get married." Yu Xiang's eyes were red. "How are we going to get married? How are you going to explain it to our ancestor?" In her eyes we're biological siblings. If we're together, it'll be adultery. She can't do anything to you, but she won't be polite to me. Yu Pinyin slightly narrowed his eyes, pressed her buttocks against his hard object, and said in a hoarse voice, "When the time comes, I'll let you acknowledge your ancestors first, and then I'll come and marry you. Let our ancestor hold a great-grandson as soon as possible, then she won't have time to be angry. Okay?" He gently rubbed his sister's soft buttocks, and his words were infinitely seductive. Yu Xiang stared at him in disbelief, and her cheeks were burning red. She stuttered, You're so shameless." If her legs were intact, she would have jumped down as if her buttocks were on fire. Yu Pinyin chuckled in a low voice. He pressed the back of her head with his big hand and pressed her beautiful lips to his. He licked them over and over again. Then he opened her snow-white teeth and swept his tongue across her sweet and warm mouth. He was so fierce that she felt as if he was going to suck her soul out of her throat. Yu Xiang struggled at first, and then her waist went limp. Her hands automatically grabbed his neck, and she breathed like a fish out of water. This was her first kiss in 2 lifetimes. However, it was a special period after all. A sharp pain in her abdomen made her regain her senses. She grabbed the hair bun behind her brother's head and pulled it away. She gasped and asked, "Wait, do you mean I still have relatives? Where are they?" The joy in Yu Pinyan's eyes faded, and he said in a hoarse voice, "Your parents have already passed away." He briefly described the various changes in family Shun, and then said, "You still have an older brother, and he's currently an official in the capital. Who is he?" Yu Xiang already had an answer in her heart when she thought of the hairpin and hairpin Shen Yuanqi had given her. "It doesn't matter who he is, and I won't let him take you away right now. It wasn't easy for the 2 of us to be together, so we should cultivate our feelings. 3 days before you get married, I'll arrange for you to acknowledge your ancestors. We haven't seen each other for 15 years, and I've never owed him any kindness for raising me. You just need to know that there's such a person and don't mind it." Yu Pinyan's tone was very domineering. Yu Xiang was so angry that she wanted to laugh. She asked, "Are we together? Why didn't I know? If we weren't together, then what were we doing before?" Yu Pinyan narrowed his eyes, and there was a very dangerous emotion hidden in his eyes. The hard thing between his crotch pressed against his sister's buttocks, and he was clamoring for invasion. "You forced me." Just as she said those words, Yu Xiang's red and swollen lips were once again covered. The big palm behind her head kept exerting force, making it impossible for her to break free. She could only entangle herself deeper with the big tongue in her mouth. Transparent liquid dripped from the corners of their mouths, and long silver threads were drawn out. The sound of water dripping made people's hearts beat faster. Tao Hong and Lulu were guarding the door. They looked at each other, and then they both turned their heads away, their cheeks red. The intense kiss finally ended, and Yu Xiang lay on her brother's broad shoulders, gasping for breath. Yu Pinyan's rough palm slowly moved from the back of her head to her slender neck, and then to her slender waist. He gently kneaded and stroked it, and he loved it so much that he couldn't bear to part with it. Yu Xiang's body was boiling hot, and all the blood in her body seemed to be bubbling and about to boil. What was even more tragic was that she was menstruating, and once she was aroused, her menstrual cycle would be unstoppable. Yu Pinyan wasn't willing to give up. He patted her buttocks and asked, "We're already at this point, and you're still not willing to marry me? Don't touch me." Yu Xiang reflexively wrapped her arms around his neck, closed her eyes and quickly shouted, "Don't touch me and don't force me. I don't have enough blood in my head and my stomach hurts. I can't think at all. Can you let me think about it? I'm really uncomfortable right now." Yu Pinyan tilted his head and sure enough, he saw that her head was covered in sweat. He couldn't bear to interrogate her, so he could only help her massage her abdomen. Yu Xiang screamed, "I told you not to touch me." She was now like a bag filled with water, and the slightest pressure would cause it to explode. "What's wrong? Do you want a doctor to come take a look?" Yu Pinyan also became nervous. "Just put me under the blankets. Hurry, hurry, hurry." She anxiously pulled on her brother's ear. Yu Pinyan had no choice but to carry her to the bed. Before he could fill her with a hot water bottle, he saw her wrap herself up in the blankets. Even her head was buried, and only a small tuft of glossy black hair could be seen. A muffled voice came from under the blankets, and it was full of shame. "Hurry and leave. Can we talk about it slowly when I'm better? I'm begging you." Yu Pinyan bent over to pull the blankets, and her small hand reached out and scratched him. She looked very much like an angry cat, and he couldn't help but chuckle. He stopped laughing, poured another hot water bottle, and placed it on his sister's belly. He kissed the top of her pitch-black hair before slowly walking away. Before he left, he said, "Then I'll come back tomorrow. Tonight you have to think about it carefully." When he walked to the corridor, he looked down at his clothes. Sure enough, he found a few dark wet marks on the crimson fabric. It was from her period. No wonder the little girl looked as if her butt was on fire. Thinking of this, he laughed again. The many troublesome matters in the estate couldn't dampen his extremely happy mood. When the sound of footsteps faded away, Yu Xiang lifted the blankets and revealed his flushed face. He shouted, "Tao Hong Lulu, come and help me tidy up." The room was in chaos. Half an hour later, Yu Xiang sat at the head of the bed in his white underwear, sipping brown sugar water. Lulu looked worried, but Tao Hong happily asked, "Miss, when are you and Master Ho going to hold your wedding?" Yu Xiang almost choked on the sugar water. He reprimanded in a low voice, "What nonsense are you talking about? How is it nonsense? Miss can only stay in the Marquis household if she marries Master Ho." Lulu retorted, "What do you know? The situation here was very complicated. Just the old lady alone won't be enough, not to mention that there are so many people in the capital watching. If word of sibling incest gets out, Mrs. Backbone will be exposed. Didn't Miss say that she should walk her own path and let others talk about it? They could only play with their mouths. Could they eat the young Miss? When Miss returns to the family and leaves the Marquis household, she and Master Ho will be justified." Tao Hong was very disapproving. Yu Xiang continued to sip the sugar water, but his eyes flashed with various emotions from time to time. Lulu gritted his teeth and said frankly, "Mrs. Legs are inconvenient. Master Ho loves her so much that he naturally won't mind. In the future, when he takes in concubines one by one, his love will gradually fade, and Miss will become a burden to Master Ho." A woman's position in the inner residence is completely dependent on a man's favor. If Miss loses his favor and can't walk, who can she control with just her mouth? In addition, the old lady will definitely be dissatisfied with Miss and won't protect her. You can only see the scenery in front of you, but how can you think of the difficulties in the future? As Master Ho's sister, Miss can be willful and reckless. After becoming his wife, she will have to be careful even when she speaks. At this point, she stole a glance at her master and braced herself to continue. So instead of marrying Master Ho, it's better to be brother and sister for the rest of their lives. Lulu was a person from ancient times, so he naturally didn't believe that a man would be faithful to a woman until death. Even if Master Ho didn't get close to women, when he got married and his master couldn't move freely, he would take in a few concubines to help him. Master Ho also couldn't tolerate sand in his eyes. Once or twice was fun, but if it happened too often, Master Ho would be tired of it. At that time, where would the master and servant go? Tao Hong was silent for a moment, then stammered, "But the problem is that Master Ho doesn't want to be brother and sister with Miss right now. Master Ho is such a domineering person, he definitely won't let Miss off. We can't resist, so why don't we obey? Moreover, Master Ho and Miss have been together for 15 years, and he also saved Miss's life. Even if he marries another woman in the future, he definitely won't treat Miss badly." Lulu was about to shake his head and refute, but Yu Xiang put the empty bowl on the bedside table heavily and said tiredly, "Okay, don't argue. I'm going to sleep. If there's anything else, wait until my stomach doesn't hurt anymore before thinking about it." Tao Hong and Lulu nodded cautiously and went downstairs with the empty bowl. Yu Xiang didn't sleep the whole night. She sat up and rubbed her legs. She could still feel above her thighs, but from her kneecaps, she gradually became numb. She wanted to try moving her toes, but she couldn't feel them at all. A deep and boundless sense of defeat attacked her heart. With this broken body of hers, who could she possibly keep? However, another voice told her that Yu Pinyin was different. Maybe she should try to believe in him. She didn't want to change, but she was pushed forward step by Yu Pinyin. He always stood behind her, not allowing her to retreat, not allowing her to look back, and not even allowing her to acknowledge her family. He was so domineering. Would he really accept a negative answer? Yu Xiang shook her head and smiled bitterly. She understood that other than marrying Yu Pinyin, there was no other way out. If her legs were intact, she could still escape the marriage or something. However, the end result was that she would be kidnapped by Yu Pinyin. There wasn't much difference. Chapter 102. The next day, Yu Xiang got up early and sat in front of the dressing table to dress up. Lulu helped her comb her hair into a spirit snake bun, and chose a necklace in the shape of a water droplet to put in her hair. The water droplet in the middle was bright red and just happened to hang between her eyebrows. It made her skin look creamy and her eyes look like deep pools. She looked indescribably gorgeous and delicate. Tao Hong saw that she was staring at the mirror in a daze and had no intention of putting on makeup herself, so he picked up the stylus and helped her draw her eyebrows. I won't put on makeup today. Yu Xiang came back to her senses. She pushed away the stylus and hesitated a little. Her white fingertips lingered on the neatly arranged lipstick boxes. Finally, she chose a peach flavor and smeared it evenly on her lips. Her brother might even steal a kiss from her today. This peach flavor was his favorite. It was sweet but not greasy. When she realized what she was thinking, Yu Xiang's calm expression cracked. She slammed the lipstick box on the dressing table. Tao Hong and Lulu were shocked. They hurriedly asked her what was wrong. Nothing. I just feel a little angry when I think of you, Miaoqi. Yu Xiang forced a smile and waved her hand. After sitting for a moment, she finally picked up the box and smeared a thick layer of lipstick on her lips. She licked it and felt that it was very sweet. She said no, but her body was very honest. This sentence suddenly popped up in her mind. She held her forehead and sighed. She was afraid that she had fallen for it. Miss, do you have a stomachache again? How about we don't go to pay respects? Tao Hong asked in a low voice. It's just a little abdominal pain. It's nothing compared to the poisoning of the ancestor. Let's go. I won't be at ease if we don't take a look. The ancestor is impatient. I'm afraid that he will personally take you, Miaoqi and mother, to apologize to each family today. It's not good for me to hide at home. Yu Xiang put the lipstick back and lowered her head to tidy up her skirt. Seeing that her collar was slightly open, she couldn't help but pull it down, revealing a seductive cleavage. Realizing what she had done, she felt as if she had been struck by lightning. She slapped her right hand with her left hand and cursed silently. Who asked you to be so cheap? Who are you trying to seduce? Tao Hong and Lulu were already used to her occasional crazy behavior. They looked at each other and smiled bitterly. After Yu Xiang finished torturing her right hand, she ignored the exposed whiteness of her chest and said calmly, "It's getting late. Let's go." She paused and pretended to ask casually, "Where did my brother go?" Because His Majesty ordered Master Ho to reflect on himself for half a month, Master Ho went to the yamen early in the morning to hand over his official duties. He came to see you at 5:15 in the morning and sat at your bedside for half an hour before leaving. Tao Hong sneakily whispered into his master's ear. Yu Xiang nodded. Her expression was very calm, but the tip of her tongue couldn't help but lick her sweet lips. Halfway through their journey, they saw Yu Xiu hurriedly greeting them. Did you know that something strange happened in the residence today? What happened? Yu Xiang's heart trembled, but she didn't show it on her face. It couldn't be that her affair with her brother was exposed, right? Didn't you leave the small courtyard in the west wing to Yu Miaoqi yesterday? When you left, there were a few kapok, albizia, begonia, and jacaranda trees that you couldn't dig up, so you could only leave them. Do you still remember? Yu Xiu touched her elbow. I remember. It's a pity that my jacaranda trees are blooming just right these days. From afar they look like they're covered in blue muslin. They're faintly discernible, hazy and cloud-like. They're so beautiful that it's breathtaking. Speaking of this, Yu Xiang felt her heart ache. Her brows were knitted together and she couldn't pull them away. They are indeed beautiful. The first time I saw them, I stood under the trees for a long time. I was mesmerized by them. Yu Xiu sighed. After a short while, she began to rejoice in her misfortune. Don't even think about it. Your jacaranda trees, kapok, albizia, begonia trees. They all withered last night. The leaves are a charred yellow, as if they were burned by fire. Who did it? You, Miaoqi? Yu Xiang's tender expression was suddenly replaced by a ferocious one. Yu Xiu quickly patted her shoulder to comfort her. No, you misheard. Those trees weren't burned. They withered on their own, so I thought it was strange. Right now, the entire Fu is saying that Yu Miaoqi is a jinx and doesn't have the good fortune to ruin your precious land. Yu Xiang stared blankly for a moment before coming back to her senses. She felt that this matter was a bit strange and felt that it was a pity for her flowers and trees. In the main courtyard, the matriarch was also listening to Mama Ma's report about the flowers and trees that had withered overnight. Her originally unsightly complexion seemed to have been painted with a layer of white paint. Her hands trembled as she wrote, "I'm afraid that she won't be able to suppress her evil aura anymore." Mama Ma nodded, "That's right. The old lady, what do you think we should do? Master Ho is only taking a break from his duties to reflect on himself. Next time he won't be so lucky. His Majesty has just bestowed for etiquette instructors, but it's not good for me to drive her away. Forget it, find her a family as soon as possible. Choose the one with the toughest life so that she won't cause trouble and implicate our marquis household." The matriarch quickly wrote, "AI, this servant will send someone to inquire about it. The capital is only so big, so it won't be easy to find her. How about this servant send someone to ask around? It doesn't matter where, as long as she can be married off as soon as possible." The matriarch put down her brush and rubbed her burning throat. Mama Ma bowed in agreement and threw a few slips of paper into the brazier to burn them. Just as she finished burning them, she heard the maidservant outside report that the 3 misses and madams had come to pay their respects. The matriarch waved her hand to have someone bring them in. The faces of the members of the Lin clan and Yu Miaoqi were very haggard, and there were dark circles around their eyes. It was clear that they hadn't slept all night. Yu Xiang followed closely behind. Her complexion wasn't much better than the two of them, but her lips were pink and moist and faintly exuded the fragrance of peaches. It made people want to take a bite. Yu Siyu, on the other hand, was glowing and took the initiative to help the old ancestor up. The matriarch sat upright and still as she wrote, "The 9th princess has been poisoned the most. Today, we will first go to the palace to ask for forgiveness from His Majesty, and Her Majesty the Empress. Yandere is already waiting at the palace gates. We will set out immediately." The members of the Lin clan had numb expressions, but Yu Miaoqi was shocked. She asked in a shrill voice, "Why do we have to go to the palace to ask for forgiveness? Had the matter already become this big? Even the emperor and empress knew about it. How was she going to marry in the future?" The matriarch coldly glanced at her and wrote, "The 9th princess is the treasure of His Majesty and Her Majesty the Empress. You bought poison dates to harm her. Don't tell me you want to let this matter pass easily and quietly? You're dreaming. Enter the palace today, go to the Crown Prince mansion tomorrow, go to the Duke's estate the day after tomorrow. Every household will need you and the Lin clan to personally present a bramble and ask for forgiveness." Yu Miaoqi's face was drained of all color. She could almost foresee the scene of her infamy spreading far and wide. How would others judge her? Greedy, unfilial, prodigal, stupid. All of these were the worst traits that the world could not tolerate in a woman. Not to mention members of the imperial family, even ordinary people would look down on her. It's over, it's completely over this time. Even if Yu Xiang's identity was exposed, she still wouldn't be able to make a comeback. Yu Miaoqi's body went limp and she fainted on the ground. The members of the Lin clan screamed in fright, but the matriarch's eyebrows didn't even twitch. She slowly wrote on the paper, "Wake her up with a splash. After she wakes up, change her clothes and set off immediately." Mama Ma hurriedly ordered people to carry her away. Yu Siyu sat down to chat with the matriarch while Yu Xiang went to prepare the gifts. The stewards outside the courtyard were all kneeling and listening to Mama Feng's lecture. In summary, there were only 2 points. First, regardless of whether Miss Xiang was of Prefecture Yu's bloodline or not, she was still their master. No one was allowed to disobey her. If anyone had any ulterior motives or couldn't control their mouths and spread rumors, Master Ho would personally deal with them. Second, from now on Miss Xiang would still be in charge of the household affairs, with Miss Siyu assisting. The rules that second Miss had abolished would be re-established from today onwards. Just yesterday alone, the household had dealt with many servants. The ones that were left were those that the Lin clan's mother and daughter had abandoned. Now that they were back in their original positions, they were naturally overjoyed and grateful. After Mama Feng finished lecturing them, they loudly agreed and kowtowed 3 times to the old lady before leaving. Within a few minutes, the servants that were scattered like scattered sand gathered together again. In the past, they thought that Miss Xiang's rules were too strict. However, when they became headless flies that ran around everywhere and frequently angered Master Ho, they understood that those rules were their guiding light and could not be ignored. Just look at the few people who were beaten to death yesterday. That was the result of not following the rules. Yu Miaoqi was splashed with 3 or 4 buckets of cold water before she finally woke up. She changed her clothes and combed her hair. With a pale face, she went to the sect to meet with the old lady and the others. Although the 9th princess poison had been cleared, her throat had been severely burned by the sulfur. At this moment, she could no longer speak and could only make babbling noises. The emperor and empress naturally hated the culprit. In addition, Emperor Chongkong knew Yu Miaoqi's background in detail. When he told the empress about how she had killed Mother Shun and plotted against Shen Yuanqi, the empress frowned in disgust. Because he had political matters to discuss with Yu Pinyin, Emperor Chongkong hurriedly left the Palace of Earthly Tranquility. After the empress sorted out her emotions, she ordered people to bring in the family Yu. Because the empress's Xiao Zhou was a child with an incomplete mind, the empress took pity on Yu Xiang, who was also handicapped. In addition, Yu Xiang could be said to have grown up under her watch. Although her temperament was perverse, her thoughts were extremely straightforward, and she also valued friendship and righteousness. Without her protection, even a small eunuch dared to fool Xiao Zhou. Therefore, not only did the empress not feel that Yu Xiang was unruly, she even indulged her. Moreover, this incident had nothing to do with her, so there was no reason for her to vent her anger. As soon as the empress arrived, she ordered people to bring Yu Xiang into the inner chamber to visit Xiao Zhou, leaving the old lady and the Lin clan outside to talk. Because the old lady had also been poisoned, the empress didn't have the heart to harshly reprimand her. However, she also didn't want to see Yu Miaoqi's extremely hypocritical face. She ordered the palace servants to bring her and the Lin clan into the side chamber to be lectured. The palace servants loudly recited the women's precepts. They recited it for a full 8 hours before the 2 of them were allowed to leave. When they were about to board the carriage, her knees were already swollen beyond belief. The old lady's anger couldn't be quelled. She wrote, "The empress has said that on the 6th day of the next month, there will be a selection in the palace to select a number of official consorts and secondary consorts for the 4th prince, 5th prince and 6th prince. Yu Miaoqi's conduct is lacking, so the selection will be dropped. She will only stay in the food to properly learn the rules." Yu Miaoqi stared at the words written in black and white in front of her, her facial features gradually becoming distorted. Selection? Why didn't it be earlier or later? Why did it have to be when she made such a big fool of herself? Was the heavens playing tricks on her? In reality, her thoughts were somewhat reasonable. If it was according to her original fate, this selection would be the perfect opportunity for her to marry into the 4th prince's fu. If it wasn't for Yu Xiang's dream of the mountain collapsing, the 4th prince would have gone to provide disaster relief in place of the crown prince. They would have met on the way and owed her a favor. If it wasn't for Yu Pinyin throwing her into prison, the family Shen wouldn't have declined, and father and mother Shen wouldn't have died. She would still be the darling of the family Shen. After Shen Yuanqi became the top scholar, he would naturally bring her back to acknowledge her ancestors. The old lady and the Lin clan would do their best to cultivate her and pave the way for her bright future. Chapter 103. At this moment, Yu Xiang was sitting in a rocking carriage with a thick black cushion beneath her. Sitting across from her was her older brother, whose eyes were shining brightly and whose lips were curled into a smile. "I haven't seen you for one night. How did you become so haggard?" Yu Pinyin reached out to touch his sister's dark eye circles. His gaze lingered on her pink lips that glowed with luster. Yu Xiang slapped his large hand away and angrily said, "Don't touch me. Your temper is getting worse." Yu Pinyin shook his head and laughed. He went straight to the point and said, "You've thought about it all night. Have you thought it through?" Yu Xiang had always loved flowers. Even the inside of the carriage was decorated with palm-sized potted plants, which were fastened to a small table with barbed wire. The plump and cute jade halo had 2 antenna-like leaves protruding from it, and it seemed to be eavesdropping on their conversation. Yu Xiang took out the flower pot and held it in her palm. She said seriously to her older brother, "After thinking about it all night, I feel that there are some things that I need to discuss with Big Brother." Yu Pinyin shifted his position and sat next to her. He stretched out his arms and wrapped them around her shoulders. His voice was low and gentle as he said, "Oh? What does Xianger want to discuss with me? I'm all ears." A strong masculine scent followed closely behind. Yu Xiang shrugged her shoulders and tried to shake off his large hand, but failed several times. Instead, it made him laugh again and again. She had no choice but to say with red ears, "Hey, do you see this potted plant?" "I see it." Yu Pinyin nodded with a smile. "Look." Yu Xiang stretched out her finger and poked at one of the jade halo's green antennae. Her tone was extremely serious as she said, "This is a plant. Even though there's a problem with its roots, it's very rare, precious, delicate, fragile and delicate." Yu Pinyin had already understood the meaning behind her words, and couldn't help but burst out laughing. Being glared at by her beautiful eyes, he hurriedly sat up straight and nodded in agreement. "That's right, she is indeed very precious, very rare, very delicate, very fragile, very delicate. She is a unique treasure in this world." Yu Xiang blushed when she heard her brother's serious praise, but she quickly regained her composure and continued, "You see, it's living well in this pit, but because of some people's whims, they want to dig it out and move it to another pit." As she spoke, she forcefully pulled out the jade halo from the basin and placed it in an empty teacup beside her. With a serious expression she said, "This new pit is beautiful, but it doesn't have enough soil. Do you think it can live as well as before?" After pondering for a moment, Yu Pinyin smiled and said, "Xianger, don't mislead your brother. You're moving around, but aren't you still in your brother's trap?" Yu Xiang was defeated and couldn't help but wipe her face. However, she forgot that her fingertips were still stained with soil, and immediately smeared herself like a little kitten. Yu Pinyin couldn't help but laugh. He leaned over and wanted to kiss the tip of her nose, but she pushed him away forcefully and said firmly, "All right, even if it's the same pit, don't forget that there's a problem with this plant's roots. It needs a lot of soil, a lot of nutrients, and a lot of careful care. Although this pit looks very big and the soil is very fertile, this plant won't be the only plant in it. Sooner or later, this pit will be planted with gray trees and weeds. They will crazily snatch everything from this plant and eventually cause it to wither and die. You've worked so hard to raise it for 15 years. Can you bear to see it wither and die?" After talking for so long, she was still jealous and still wanted to monopolize him. Yu Pinyin held his forehead and laughed softly. He hugged his sister's shoulder and gently shook her. "Xianger, my good Xianger, how can you be so cute?" He simply loved her to the bone. "Don't touch me." Yu Xiang's stomach began to hurt again. She fiercely pushed her brother away. Yu Pinyin laughed so hard that tears almost came out of his eyes. He put the pitiful green halo back into the small flower pot and whispered, "What if this is the only plant in this pit? Would it be willing to take root?" Yu Xiang's eyes flickered and she vaguely said, "Who knows? It looks like there's only one plant now, but it's hard to say in the future. After all, this land is too fertile. Everyone wants to have a piece of it." Yu Pinyin had a green halo. He took out a handkerchief and wiped his hands. After he finished wiping, he helped his sister wipe as well. He even cleaned her fingernails. He spoke slowly, "Xianger, do you remember when your brother was accused of murder and imprisoned? That was when Yu Pinyin was 12 or 13 years old. Yu Xiang was still in the future, but there was a trace of memory left in her mind." She nodded. Her attention was completely drawn to him. After Yu Pinyin finished wiping his hands, he went to help her wipe her face. His expression was gentle and doting, but the words that came out of his mouth were astonishing. "That year I had just turned 13. I was still a young boy who didn't know the ways of the world. One of my so-called best friends took me to a literary gathering. In reality, that place was a brothel." Hearing this, Yu Xiang couldn't help but bare her teeth. Her eyes were very fierce. Yu Pinyin's rising hostility was dissipated by her cute expression. He hugged her shoulders and continued, "Not long after I went in, I lost consciousness. When I woke up again, a prostitute with ulcers all over her skin was lying on top of me, preparing to take action. Even now, I can still smell the rotten smell of a dying person emanating from her body." Yu Xiang's heart tightened. She asked in a trembling voice, She has red bayberry sores? This move was really vicious. Not only did it cause her brother to contract an incurable disease, But it also ruined his reputation. If it really succeeded, she didn't dare to think too deeply. She hugged her brother with difficulty and gently patted him. Her clear and gentle eyes seemed to say, "Don't be afraid. It's all in the past. Everything is in the past." When Yupinian saw that she didn't reject him after hearing about this filthy past, but instead felt pity for him, his already soft heart slowly melted. He continued to whisper, "Fortunately, I woke up in time. I pulled off the hairpin on her head and stabbed her to death. Then, I hastily put on my clothes and escaped from the backyard. Because I was drugged, my steps were unsteady. I slowly walked down the dark alley to the liveliest and brightest street. That day was Chinese Valentine's Day. The moment I walked out of the alley, I saw Chong Yafu and Yu Pinhong smiling at each other in the crowd. I quietly followed behind them. With my own eyes, I saw them release the river lanterns and exchange the tokens. And then, Yu Xiang tightly grasped his fingertips. Her heart was throbbing with pain. Then I soaked in the ice-cold river for half the night. In the early morning, I was caught by the bailiffs and thrown into prison. Yu Pinyan's eyes were blank as he fell into his memories. And then, Yu Xiang felt terrible. But she couldn't help but want to know what happened. Then I had a high fever. The old ancestor came to see me in prison. I told her that I wanted to see my mother before I died. And then, Yu Xiang's throat was dry. Mother didn't come. She only brought me a message. What message? She said that I tarnished my father's good name. She said that I didn't deserve to be my father's son. Yu Pinyan's deep voice was full of sarcasm. Yu Xiang's face was unknowingly covered in tears. Her eyelashes were filled with sparkling tears. Yu Pinyan lowered his head to look at her. The ruthlessness and anger in his heart were washed away by her tears. He couldn't help but laugh. His voice also became light and gentle. Since then, I have felt that women are the dirtiest things in the world. They are detestable. Yu Xiang's tears stopped abruptly. She stared at him in disbelief. Yu Pinyan hurriedly added with a smile, "Of course, except for you and the old ancestor." He held his sister's soft, white, and tender hand and kissed it. "Xiang'er, I'm very glad that you are my sister, but also not my sister. If it weren't for that, I wouldn't have fallen for you. Other than you, I wouldn't have fallen for another woman. You can believe me." With that, he kissed the teardrops hanging on his sister's eyelashes. Yu Xiang blinked, then blinked again. She asked with a dazed expression, "Then when did you fall for me?" Yu Pinyan pondered for a moment, then smiled helplessly. "I don't know either. It's just that one day when I picked you up, I suddenly realized that I couldn't bear to put you down." This sentence was simple and plain, but it was like a surging tide. Wave after wave, it crashed against Yu Xiang's already fragile heart. She stepped back a little and smiled brightly. "All right, this precious plant of mine will take root in your hole. You must water it on time and fertilize it on time." "How do I water it? How do I fertilize it?" Yu Pinyan's heart was filled with boundless joy, but he suppressed it on the surface. He gently and slowly rubbed his sister's slender waist. Yu Xiang's ears were red, but her expression was noble and cold. She pointed at her pink lips. "There, I'm thirsty here." Yu Pinyan chuckled. After laughing, he suddenly leaned over. He first sucked on her lips and licked them inch by inch. Then he pried open her teeth and sucked crazily. His large tongue licked her small tongue and stirred it non-stop, making shameful sounds of water. The two of them hugged each other tighter and tighter. They only separated after the time it took to drink a cup of tea. A thin line of silver appeared between their lips. Yu Pinyan pressed his finger on his sister's red and swollen lips. His eyes were smiling and his voice was hoarse. "You knew that brother was going to kiss you, so you put on peach-flavored lipstick?" "That's right," Yu Xiang calmly admitted and threatened, "In the future, if you go back on your promise and fool around outside, I'll put arsenic in my lipstick. We'll kiss and we'll both die and go to hell together." Yu Pinyan was not frightened by her. Instead, he laughed heartily. "Xiang'er, you're so sweet. Such vicious words actually sound sweet when they come out of your mouth." His hoarse and deep voice gradually disappeared in the kiss between their lips. When the carriage arrived at the Marquis household, Yu Xiang's eyes were already filled with love. Her waist was sore and her lips were red and swollen. At a glance it was obvious that she had been loved countless times. Yu Pinyin took off his coat and wrapped it around her as they entered the residence. Yu Xiang caught a glimpse of the old madam and hurriedly buried her face with a guilty conscience. She only heaved a sigh of relief when they arrived at Jingfu Courtyard. Tao Hong and Lulu sent Master Ho off. They gathered around the bed and asked, "Miss, have you and Master Ho reached an agreement? What's the plan for the future?" Yu Xiang licked her almost broken lips and smiled sweetly. "We've reached an agreement. Soon you'll have to call me madam." Tao Hong jumped up in joy. Lulu, on the other hand, was deeply worried. "Miss, how should we deal with your identity? How should we explain it to the old madam?" Yu Xiang sighed. "Brother will help me deal with my identity. As for the old madam, we can only rely on time to solve the problem. I really don't want to leave brother. I hope you can understand." Chapter 104. The next day, the matriarch continued to visit the Crown Prince mansion with Yu Miaoqi and the Lin clan. Yu Xiang and Yu Siyu traveled together. The Crown Princess's throat was also burned, so she sent the Lin clan members to the side hall to be lectured. She communicated with the matriarch, Yu Xiang, and the others using slips of paper. There was no ill feeling between their words. In the following half a month, the group visited the poisoned female guests one after another. Because the Empress and the Crown Princess had magnanimously forgiven them, they didn't dare to be overbearing. They only gave a few words of advice. However, Yu Miaoqi and the Lin clan's reputation was still ruined. In the past, there were still a few familiar families in the prefecture Yu that they could interact with. Now the prefecture Yu was completely deserted. The influential officials, intentionally or unintentionally, distanced themselves from the family Yu in an attempt to push the family Yu out of the circle of the top aristocratic families in Shangjing, completely isolating them. This action was exactly what Yu Pinyin wanted. Without human relations, he would be able to act without any distractions when the emperor eliminated the aristocratic families in the future. Emperor Cheng Kong was even more happy to see this happen. Yu Pinyin was now a loyal official, a good official, a lonely official, and an invincible general. Not only did he want to make the best use of this blade for himself, he also wanted to leave it for the Crown Prince. It didn't matter if his reputation was bad, as long as his ability wasn't bad. Therefore, although this matter had some impact on the prefecture Yu, it didn't damage Yu Pinyin's position in Emperor Chongkang's heart. Today, after visiting the last family, the matriarch summoned everyone to the main courtyard for a discussion. The weather was getting colder and colder. A fire cage was burning in the middle of the hall. On top of it was a table covered with a quilt. The matriarch's body was weak after being poisoned. At this time she was huddling under the quilt to keep warm. When she saw her grandchildren, she quickly called for them to sit around the fire cage. After Yu Pinyin put his sister down, he sat next to her. Yu Siyu sat on the other side of the old lady. The four of them just happened to fill up all the seats. Seeing Mama Ma come in with a box, Yu Xiang asked, "Do you want to play mahjong? I just happened to bring some golden sunflower seeds over." Upon hearing this, Yu Siyu also went to dig into her purse with an excited expression. Yu Pinyin smiled as he untied the pouch from his waist and handed it to his younger sister. Inside the pouch were not golden sunflower seeds, but 5-spice fried sunflower seeds. Yu Xiang was even happier than when she got the golden melon seeds. She poured them all out, spread out a handkerchief, and raised her chin at her brother. "Peel the melon seeds and put them together. I like to chew them in big bites. That's what I call fragrant." Yu Pinyin pinched the tip of her nose and picked up a melon seed to peel. Yu Xiang didn't dare to hide anything. The first melon seeds he peeled were naturally fed to the elder ancestor. "What about me?" Yu Siyu was indignant. "Peel it yourself. Don't you have hands and feet?" Yu Xiang waved her hand. She took the box and opened it, sighing. "So it's not mahjong tiles." The old lady's mood had improved a lot after she made a fuss. She smiled and said, "I didn't call you here today to play around. These are the accounts of Yu Miaoqi's steward. Today we'll check the accounts in front of everyone. Then we'll have the Lin clan pack up and leave." As soon as she finished speaking, someone reported from outside the door, The old lady, Madam and second Miss have arrived. The Lin clan walked in front, followed by Yu Miaoqi. Both of them wore plain clothes and put on some makeup to cover their haggard faces. Beside Yu Miaoqi stood two awe-inspiring mamas. Behind them were four servant girls. If someone who didn't know the inside story saw this, they would think that she had a very revered status in the Marquis household. The two half knelt and saluted. Seeing that there was no more space next to the fire cage, they could only pick up two cold stools and sit down. The old lady's throat had already healed. She spoke in a low voice, "Sit closer. Right now we'll clearly hand over the accounts in front of everyone. Then the Lin clan can take the dowry and leave." The four mamas had to return to the palace. What was the difference between checking the accounts in front of them and flipping Yu Miaoqi's face on the spot? Managing such a large Marquis household was beyond her ability. However, in order to not lose to Yu Xiang, she could only do everything she could to support herself. She was also the most selfish. When the dowry and the Marquis household's interests couldn't be satisfied, she would naturally choose to make up for the dowry. She grew up in the family shun and was very proficient in accounting. No matter how riddled the accounts were, she could always fill them in. If it was just the old lady checking the accounts, then it would be fine. However, the old lady had also called Yu Pinyin and Yu Xiang over. Not to mention Yu Xiang's eyesight, Yu Pinyin had arrested countless corrupt officials and checked countless elaborate false accounts. As long as the two of them flipped through the accounts, they could beat her back to her original state. When she thought of the amount she was in deficit, Yu Miaoqi's heart turned cold. Her back was covered in a thick layer of sweat on this cold day. When the cold wind outside the door blew, even her soul felt a bone-piercing chill. "Look at you shivering like that. Come and warm yourself by the fire." Yu Xiu smiled and waved at her. However, her eyes hid endless malice. "Grandmother, I suddenly feel unwell. Can I go and rest first and check the accounts tomorrow?" Yu Miaoqi tried to stall for time, and then persuade the Lin clan to take the blame for her. Because the Lin clan was still in the dark about this matter, they would naturally be shocked when they first heard about it. Then other people would see the clues. "You can go back. The Lin clan can stay." The old lady took out the account books from the box and looked at Yu Xiu. "I heard that you're in charge of the villages in the countryside. Today let old ancestors see if you've made any progress." Yu Xiu gladly agreed. Yu Xiang also picked up a stack of account books. How could Yu Miaoqi dare to go back alone? She could only kindly send the four mamas and four maidservants away. Then she walked over with the Lin clan and sat down. "Mother, please give daughter-in-law another chance." "Mother, daughter-in-law." The Lin clan tried to beg the old lady for mercy. In her heart, she didn't think there was a problem with the account books. She only thought that it was a mess caused by the servants deceiving their superiors, and that it had nothing to do with her daughter. But at the time, those servants had pushed the blame onto her daughter in front of all the guests. She couldn't refute them and could only take the blame. The old lady sternly interrupted her. "Shut up. You can talk to me after checking the accounts." As she spoke, she ordered someone to bring over 3 abacuses. The matter of checking accounts had nothing to do with men, so Yu Pinyin didn't participate. He only smiled and looked at his sister's serious profile. Yu Xiang sensed his burning gaze and looked at old ancestor. She discovered that she was engrossed in checking the accounts and didn't notice her. Her moist red lips slightly pouted. This was her habitual action when she asked her brother for a kiss. At the end, she even sent him a teasing look. Yu Pinyin's hand that was holding the teacup suddenly tightened. If there weren't so many people in the hall, he really wanted to pull the little minx into his arms and dote on her. After Yu Xiang finished teasing her brother, she opened the account books and seriously looked at them. She skimmed through them very quickly. While the others had only finished half of the books, she had already read 4 or 5 books. She used a red pen to circle suspicious areas. After half an hour, she finished reading all the books. She took out the abacus and her fingers quickly moved over it. For a moment, there was only a series of crisp crackling sounds in the hall. The old lady and Yu Xiu had already stopped working. They waited for her to finish one book before handing over another book. Their speed was as fast as lightning. The fine sweat on Yu Miaoqi's forehead had already condensed into droplets and flowed down his hairline to his neck. This was the first time she had seen Yu Xiang manage the accounts. Her sharp eyes and fast speed shocked her. It was because Yu Xiang was too capable that her competitive spirit was aroused and she desperately wanted to surpass her. However, after struggling for half a year, she disappointedly discovered that the gap between her and Yu Xiang was not as large as she had imagined. She still had a long way to go. She quietly moved her arm and pulled the Lin clan's hand over. She wrote stroke by stroke on the Lin clan's palm, "Mother, help me." The Lin clan looked at her in confusion. She wrote again, her eyes filled with deep despair and pleading. The Lin clan suddenly realized something. Her eyes widened and her pupils contracted. She mouthed silently, "Did you really use the central funds?" Yu Miaoqi had to nod and admit it. She originally only wanted to use a little, and return the money when the shop made money. Who knew that the shop would lose more and more money? No matter how much money she spent, there was no sound. She became anxious, but there was nothing she could do. She could only piece together the money and make up for it. If it wasn't for the fact that she had no other choice, she definitely wouldn't have dared to use the old lady's money. The Lin clan was so scared that they began to tremble. She originally wanted to let the old lady check first. After checking and seeing that there were no problems with the account books, she might be able to keep them after a few pleas. However, if her daughter really embezzled the money, she was afraid that she could only be kicked out of the house. This was her and her Junjie's home. She still had many beautiful memories. She couldn't bear to leave, and she couldn't bear to lose the status of being the Junjie's wife. If she couldn't be buried with her Junjie after death, where would she find him in the Yellow Springs? With this thought, the Lin clan felt endless resentment towards Yu Miaoqi. However, when she saw her fearful eyes, the Lin clan's heart softened. She felt as if her internal organs had been scraped by a steel knife. When the two of them exchanged glances, Yu Xiang closed the last account book and sighed. Yu Pinyin rubbed her sore fingertips and fed her a cup of tea. "Yu Miaoqi, do you know that you're like a groundhog?" No one expected this to be her first sentence. The old lady and Yu Xiu froze. Yu Pinyin also revealed a confused expression. Yu Miaoqi wasn't sure what she meant. She forced a smile and said, "Mimi, are you joking?" "I'm not joking." Yu Xiang patted the account book. "Look at you. You're digging a hole here, a hole there, a handful of soil here, a handful of soil there. You've dug countless holes in a perfectly good piece of land. Don't you think you're like a groundhog?" Yu Miaoqi understood this time. Her face immediately turned pale. Yu Xiang's light tone suddenly turned severe. "If you don't have the ability, then don't take on such a big business. If the dowry shop lost money, you could have closed it down. Why use the public money to make up for it? Do you think the public money is your private property? I've seen all kinds of people, but this is the first time I've seen someone as incompetent, wasteful, and greedy as you. In just half a year, you've embezzled 68,448 taels of silver. Tell me what you should do." Chapter 105. The Lin clan once again placed all the blame on themselves. She could be called a loving mother to Yu Miaoqi. No matter how big of a mistake she made, she could forgive her and even bear all the responsibility. However, she didn't care about Yu Pinyin at all, as if she had never given birth to this child. Yu Xiang could imagine how much her older brother had crouched in a dark corner of the prison, suffering from the fear of murder and the torture of a high fever. How much he had longed for the warmth and motherly love of the Lin clan. However, what did she do? It was fine if she didn't come to visit, but she actually said that her older brother wasn't worthy of being her child. This sentence was equivalent to personally stabbing a knife into her older brother's heart. The more she defended Yu Miaoqi, the more Yu Xiang disliked her. She sneered, "Mother, don't cover up for her anymore. In the past 6 months I've only seen Yu Miaoqi jumping up and down, eager to show off her talents to others, but forgetting to measure her own worth." Without waiting for her to finish, Yu Miaoqi suddenly flared up. "Yu Xiang, shut up. Everyone has the right to reprimand me, but you don't. What's your relationship with the family you? You've freeloaded for 15 years, and the family you has already done everything they can for you. You're so anxious. Could it be that you want to meddle with the prefecture you family business? Do you think you're worthy?" Yu Xiang choked. There was a lump in her chest, and she couldn't vent her anger. She already knew that Yu Miaoqi would use these words to block her and make her very unhappy. She poured a cup of tea and pulled her older brother's large hand over under the cover of the quilt. She wrote on his palm stroke by stroke, "How am I not worthy? I'm the future Marchioness. Your money is my money. She stole our money, but I'm not allowed to say anything. What kind of logic is this?" Yu Pinyin carefully identified the strokes. When he realized what she had said, he almost drowned in the joy surging in his heart. He suddenly pulled his sister into his arms and lowered his head to kiss her slightly red cheeks. With a crisp pop, not only was Yu Xiang petrified, but old Madam and Yu Siyu were also stunned. Even the Lin clan and Yu Miaoqi, who were panicking, were momentarily speechless. After kissing her, Yu Pinyin didn't back down. He continued to kiss his sister's hair and said in a hoarse voice, "I'm sorry. I suddenly remembered how Xiang'er blocked a knife for me back then. Without Xiang'er I wouldn't be who I am now. Who dares to say that she doesn't deserve it?" Sensing that the cat in his arms was about to explode, he rubbed the back of her neck to comfort her. Old Madame Fu was immediately brought back to her memories. She nodded and said, "Yandere is right. Xiang'er is a part of my family, Yu. If anyone dares to gossip about her in the future, they can get the hell out." "Yu Miaoqi, you have the nerve to reprimand Xiang'er. Look at what you've done. You've used the public's money to supplement your own private assets. In the entire capital, you won't be able to find a more morally corrupt young lady than you." Old Madame Fu angrily slammed the table, scaring Yu Miaoqi into silence. Yu Xiang, on the other hand, let out a sigh of relief. She thought that it was a close call. Then she buried her face in her brother's arms and bit his chest to vent her anger, causing his entire body to tremble. Yu Pinyin's lower abdomen was on fire, but he couldn't do anything about it. He could only smile bitterly and stroke the cat's fur. Lin clan members knew that they had no way out. They knelt at old Madame Fu's feet and cried, "Mother, don't scold Cheer. I did all of this. She's just a child. She doesn't have the guts." Old Madame Fu was so angry that she laughed. "Lin clan, don't treat me like a fool. I believe that you don't have the guts, but I don't believe that Yu Miaoqi doesn't have the guts. If she didn't have the guts, would she have stubbornly broken into the relay station to deliver medicine to the crown prince? If she didn't have the guts, would she have smashed Family Shun's gold Buddha statue and glued it back, causing Family Shun's family to be ruined? If she didn't have the guts, would she have stolen Madame Shun's life-saving money and snuck out to look for her family? If she didn't have the guts, would she have bribed the Feng family's mother and son to ruin Siyu's reputation? If she didn't have the guts, would she have spread rumors to ruin Lord Shun's career? Her guts are bigger than the heavens. Old Madame Fu was so angry that she dug up many old matters that no one knew about. Not only did she scold Yu Miaoqi until she couldn't raise her head, but she also made Yu Xiang's eyes widen. Yu Pinyin had only told her that her surname was Shun, that her parents had passed away, and that she only had one older brother. However, connecting it to the coronet that Shun Yuanqi had given her, and the old madam's accusations, she instantly connected all the clues into a story. A tragic story of a ruined family, and the culprit behind all of this was Yu Miaoqi. Although she didn't have any feelings for Family Shun, Family Shun's blood still flowed in her body. Taking 10,000 steps back, based on the things that Yu Miaoqi had done, even if it was an unrelated outsider, they would still feel righteous indignation. She withdrew from her older brother's embrace, raised the teacup in her hand, and threw it at Yu Miaoqi like an enraged lion. "Good one, Yu Miaoqi. You even said that I stole your respected position and wealth. Why didn't you tell me that you caused my parents' deaths? Why didn't you tell me that you almost caused my older brother's reputation to be ruined? You venomous woman, how can you still have the face to live? In any case, they raised you for more than 10 years. Yu Miaoqi had already expected that she would be furious, so she quickly hid behind the Lin clan while she was making trouble. She wanted to defend herself, but when she opened her mouth, she found that she had nothing to say. Yu Pinyin hugged his younger sister tightly, his large palm stroking her back over and over again, trying to calm her down. The old madam knew that she had said the wrong thing, so she quickly leaned over and whispered, "Xiang'er, don't be angry. It's all over. You still have old ancestor, your older brother, your older sister, And your family that loves you. Don't be angry, it's all over. The Lin clan hugged Yu Miaoqi back and cried. Please don't blame Cheer, at least leave her a way out. I'll leave, okay? I'll go back and pack my things now. She had already accepted her fate. She only hoped that her daughter could safely stay in the Marquis household and find a good home. Yu Xiang didn't have any feelings for the Shun couple, so her anger over their wrongful deaths wasn't as strong as her anger over Shen Yuanqi being hurt by the rumors. After she calmed down, she only felt sad for them. I'm fine. She patted her older brother and smiled at the old madam. Then she looked at Yu Miaoqi and said word by word, in the future, don't say that I owe you anything in front of me. I only owe you riches and honor, but you owe me a blood feud of the destruction of my family. If we really want to talk about it, I should kill you with my own hands today to avenge my parents. She pulled out a dagger from a hidden compartment in the wheelchair armrest and stabbed it into the table. The dull thud scared the Lin clan and Yu Miaoqi so much that they both trembled. But since you're also surnamed Yu, I won't touch you. In the future, stay away from me. If you're there, I won't be there. If I'm there, you won't be there. Do you understand? Her tone was cold. Despite such a blatant threat, the old madam and Yu Pinyin didn't stop her. One closed her eyes and pretended to sleep, while the other focused on drinking tea. His big hand hidden under the table was still holding his younger sister's small white hand and rubbing it, unable to stop himself. I understand. The Lin clan held his daughter's head and promised. He stood up and said, as long as you don't drive Cheer out, I'll leave immediately. She had no choice but to leave. Although the poisonous date incident was already over, who knew what those female guests were thinking? Divorcing her at this juncture would be the best explanation, and no one would be able to say anything. Yu Siyu, who had been silent all this time, spoke up at the right time. Mother, you're leaving just like that? Aren't you forgetting something? As he spoke, he slapped the thick stack of account books with a loud thud. That's right, there was still the 60,000 taels of silver that her daughter had lost. Only then did the Lin clan remember this. She couldn't stand straight and held her head as if she was about to faint. All of her dowry added together was only worth 20,000 taels of silver. Where would she go to find 40,000 taels of silver? Go back and ask her Shu elder brother for help? If he knew that she was no longer a marchioness, he would be the first to hit her when she was down. A cold wind blew against the beaded curtains. It was clearly very pleasant to the ears, but it made the Lin clan feel extremely desolate. She held back her tears and knelt at the old madam's feet again. After kowtowing, she wanted to say something, but found that she didn't know what to say. The evidence was conclusive and the consequences were severe. She didn't even have the leeway to plead for mercy. The old madam still closed her eyes and pretended to sleep. Yu Pinyin suddenly said, forget it. You can leave. This was the last time he would show mercy to the Lin clan. The Lin clan cried tears of joy and said matter-of-factly, since Yandere won't pursue the matter, then I'll leave all of the dowry to Cheer. After I leave, I hope that you two siblings can reconcile and help each other. Your father is still watching over you from the underworld. He definitely doesn't want you to end up like this. Yu Pinyin, Yu Xiang, and Yu Siyu all had strange expressions on their faces. The old madam suddenly opened her eyes and slammed the prayer beads in her hand on the table. She screamed at the top of her lungs, get out of here. Hurry and get out. I never want to see you again. The Lin clan was scared out of their wits and instantly collapsed to the ground. Yu Pinyin put down his teacup and said in a low voice, go pack your things. After you're done, I'll personally send you home. Yu Miaoqi wanted to support the Lin clan, but Mama Ma called two servant girls to half-drag the Lin clan away. She could only stand there awkwardly. The old madam didn't even look at her. She sighed and said, Xiang'er, you know about the sins that Yu Miaoqi committed. That's right. Shen Zhuangyuan is your blood-related older brother. What do you think now? Do you have any plans? The old madam's subtext was asking Yu Xiang if she wanted to acknowledge her roots and ancestors. Of course, she wanted to acknowledge her roots and ancestors, but Yu Xiang wasn't familiar with Shen Yuanqi. If she suddenly ran over to live with him, she would more or less be uncomfortable. Moreover, she had just confessed her feelings to her older brother. It was the sweetest and most affectionate time. She really couldn't bear to leave. Yu Pinyin didn't say anything, but his eyes darkened slightly. Yu Xiang quickly glanced at him and answered slowly, "Since he's my blood-related older brother, I should naturally." Before she could finish her sentence, the old madam slapped her on the head and forced her to swallow her words. "You damn child! My family, you worked so hard to raise you for 15 years, and you actually want to leave just like that? I originally thought that you were different from that ingrate Yu Miaoqi, but I didn't expect you to be so cold-hearted. I'm telling you to leave. I'm telling you to leave. See if I don't break your legs." The old madam picked up the crutch and hit her leg. Yu Xiang didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She burrowed into her older brother's arms and shouted, "Old madam, don't hit me. My legs are broken to begin with. I'm not leaving, I'm not going anywhere, okay?" Yu Pinyin hugged her tightly in his arms and smiled happily. "Old madam, please calm down. Xiang isn't going anywhere. She was born as a member of the family Yu, and when she dies, she'll be a ghost of the family Yu. If she dares to leave, I'll bring her back even if I have to go to heaven or hell." Chapter 106. The Lin clan originally wanted to take away her late husband's memorial tablet, but Mama Ma stopped them. She said that she was no longer Master Ho's wife and wasn't worthy of worshipping Master Ho. These words caused the Lin clan to burst into tears. After crying, they had no choice but to pack up and leave. Yu Miaoqi sat in the same carriage as her, and Yu Pinyin rode in front to lead the way. The group didn't go to the Lin mansion, but instead went to Lin Jimin's, the Lin clan's younger brother, small courtyard on South Gate Street. Yu Miaoqi held the Lin clan's cold fingertips and quietly asked, "Mother, youngest uncle is unreliable. Why don't you go find eldest uncle? Although you're no longer the Marchioness, I'm still part of the family Yu. For my sake, they won't dare to do anything to you." In the end, she was thinking for herself. Only by sending the Lin clan back to the Lin mansion would she have a chance to get in touch with eldest uncle Lin and borrow the Lin family's money to salvage the situation. The Lin clan firmly shook her head. "You can't go find your eldest uncle. If he knows that I've been divorced by the Marquis household, not only will he not help me, he'll do everything he can to suppress me. You can't go find your eldest uncle," she reiterated. Yu Miaoqi had a bad feeling. Mother, what kind of deep hatred could cause him to hold a grudge until now? You're still a family. You're bound together for good or ill. The Lin clan hesitated for a long time before finally speaking frankly. "That year, in order to fight for the family business, your youngest uncle and I worked together to kill your eldest uncle's eldest son." So, she really couldn't say the rest of her words. Yu Miaoqi was speechless. She never would have thought that such a lowly and cowardly Lin clan would have such a vicious and merciless side. You could work with others to kill your eldest brother's eldest son, so why couldn't you have killed Yu Xiang earlier? She simply wanted to shout it out regardless of everything. There was a deathly silence in the carriage. By the time the two regained their senses, they had already arrived in front of Lin Jimin's door. When Madame Sun saw Yu Pinyin leaping down from the tall horse, she hurriedly lifted her skirt and came out to greet him. "I was wondering why the magpies were so noisy on the branches today. It turns out that eldest nephew is here. Please come in." Yu Pinyin waved his hand. "No, I'm just sending her home. I'll have to trouble you to take care of her in the future." Madame Sun looked back and saw Yu Miaoqi and the Lin clan standing beside the carriage. Their faces were very haggard, and the Lin clan was carrying a small package in their hands. On the day of her wedding anniversary, Madame Sun was also present. The Lin clan and Yu Miaoqi had done such a disgraceful thing that she couldn't raise her head for half a month. Seeing this scene, how could she not understand? The Marquis household had divorced the Lin clan in order to appease public anger. From the standpoint of an outsider, Madame Sun would say they deserved it. From the standpoint of a family member, she only wanted to kneel to Yu Pinyin and beg him not to be so heartless. Unexpectedly, before she could speak, Yu Pinyin had already leapt onto the horse's back and urged, "If you have something to say it quickly. I'm busy." With the Lin clan gone, Yu Miaoqi could be said to be isolated and without help. She grabbed the corner of Yu Pinyin's robe and begged, "Eldest brother, Can't you wait until the storm calms down before bringing mother back? I know you resent mother for being cold to you, but think about it carefully. After all these years, she has never mistreated you. Wasn't it hard for her to give birth to you after carrying you for 10 months? Pinyin looked down at her with a cold smile. That's right, the Lin clan had never mistreated him, but he would rather the Lin clan hit and scold him than be ignored by them for more than 10 years. The most hurtful thing in this world was not the pain of the flesh, but the pain of the heart. However, this mother and daughter pair were heartless, so what was the point of saying so much to them? Pinyin laughed and tightened his grip on the reins to gallop away, leaving behind Miaoqi to stare at his back with hatred. On the second floor of a hotel across the street, a handsome young man dressed in luxurious clothes pointed at Miaoqi, who was radiating a murderous aura, and asked, "Who is that woman? She seems to want to skin Commander Yu alive." The aide sitting across from him replied, "Fourth Master, that is Commander Yu's younger sister, Miaoqi." The youth naturally knew the details of the poison date incident. He sighed with a smile, so it was her. What bad luck. What a pity. It was a pity that the Crown Princess and the Ninth Princess hadn't been poisoned to death together. That way, he could have easily toppled the Crown Prince's most reliable backer. It really was a pity. The aide nodded in understanding. Indeed, you were just a bit off by luck. However, Fourth Master, as the saying goes, an ant's nest collapses 1,000 li. No matter how indestructible a wall looks on the outside, as long as you find a node inside and destroy it, you can cause the entire wall to collapse. This node is right in front of you. What do you think, Fourth Master? The youth muttered to himself for a moment, then raised his cup and drank to his heart's content. Let's give it a try. Miaoqi sent the Lin clan into the room. Before she could even sit down, Sunshur anxiously asked, "Why did you only bring back so little things? Although you were divorced, your dowry should be handled by you. The family you has no right to take it." The Lin clan wasn't stupid. She cried, "Sister-in-law, you don't know. In order to make up for the losses of the dowry stores, I misappropriated more than 60,000 taels of public silver. The matriarch found out. My dowry was all detained by the matriarch in the Marquis household as compensation. I don't have anything on me now. I only brought a few pieces of clothing and a few hairpins." Sunshur furrowed her brows and angrily jabbed her forehead with her fingertips, scolding, "You still have the face to cry. How can you do such a disgraceful thing as misappropriating public silver? You misappropriated so much money. Don't tell me you don't have a single cent left? Where did you spend it? How much money can a few stores cost?" Miaoqi had a headache from her shrill voice. She fiercely smashed her teacup and scolded, "Have you said enough? A few stores don't cost much money. Ask yourself, how much money did you and Uncle embezzle from the accounts? Just because I didn't say anything doesn't mean I don't know. I just didn't have anyone to use, so I tolerated you for the time being. Now that I've sent my mother here, I don't want you to return the money. I only hope that you can take good care of my mother. I'm still the legitimate daughter of the Marquis household. With me supporting you, you won't have to worry about food." Miaoqi's words didn't mean that she had any feelings for the Lin clan. She just didn't have anyone to rely on, and wanted to leave a way out for herself. She had treated the family Shun too harshly. Only now did she understand the principle of leaving a way out for others to meet in the future. If she had stayed for one more day and begged Shen Yuanqi to send her back to the capital to reunite with her relatives, she definitely wouldn't have fallen to the point where she was deserted by everyone. The Lin clan was moved to tears, but Sunshur didn't buy it. She sneered, "Who do you think you are? Can you even compare to a single finger of Xiang'er's? Xiang'er has more face than you. I'll go and beg her to get my dowry back." The Lin clan hurriedly pulled her back and anxiously said, "Don't go. She won't help you. She's not my daughter." "What did you say?" Sunshur dug her ears, thinking that she had misheard. The Lin clan was afraid that she would go and cause trouble and forcefully take away the dowry they had left for their daughter, so they could only tell her what had happened that year. Sunshur was stunned for a long time. When she came to her senses, she wanted to tear the Lin clan apart. She scolded, "You idiot! You're so stupid. It doesn't matter if she's not your flesh and blood. As long as old Madam and Master Ho like her, it's fine. You raised her and made her favor you. Isn't that several hundred times more effective than this star of misfortune? If Xiang'er could say a few good words for you today, you wouldn't have been kicked out of the house. You idiot, you didn't care about what you should care about, and you treasured what you shouldn't care about. Your capable son actually had the heart to not care about you for 15 years. You really deserve to end up like this today. The Lin clan was living under someone else's roof, so they didn't dare to refute. Yu Miaoqi couldn't listen anymore. But she didn't have the strength to fight with Sunshine. She straightened her back and slowly walked out of the courtyard. She wandered on the street like a wandering soul. The hustle and bustle of the street set off the loneliness at this moment. Her eyes were slightly moist, and she had to raise her head to look at the sky to prevent her tears from splashing down. "Miss, be careful." A clear voice suddenly sounded, and then she was pulled into a broad and warm embrace. A carriage sped past her feet, bringing along a gust of wind. Yu Miaoqi raised her head with lingering fear and bumped into a pair of gentle eyes. The extraordinarily handsome young man raised the corner of his lips and smiled at her, like a beam of golden sunshine sprinkling down. Prefecture Yu Xiang returned to Jingfu's small courtyard after bidding farewell to the old madam. At this moment, she was weakly lying in front of the dressing table. The old madam was determined not to let her and Shen Yuanqi recognize each other. She really treated her as her own granddaughter and loved her dearly. If the matter between her and her brother was exposed in the future, the old madam would be very sad, and she could foresee her strong resistance. It was really worrying. Yu Xiang sighed faintly at herself in the mirror. "Miss, don't think about it. Hurry and plant the seeds that Dr. Piao sent. If they don't germinate next month, the Bingjin Yulu ointment you promised to give to the crown princess will be gone." Tao Hong timely reminded. Yu Xiang immediately took off the pearl hairpins on her head, wrapped a headscarf around her head, and changed into coarse clothes. She ordered Lulu to push her to the stone table outside the courtyard. Dr. Piao made Yu Xiang a medicine farmer, so he naturally wouldn't instruct her, a cripple, to dig holes and plant the seeds. He only sent the seeds of precious herbs, and let her plant them in a flower pot. If they grew, then he would transplant them to his medicine garden. On the stone table, there were many palm-sized flower pots neatly arranged. Inside the pots there was a soil base that Yu Xiang specially mixed. She only needed to poke a hole with her fingertip, stuff the seeds into the hole, fill it with soil and water. After quickly planting a dozen seeds, Yu Xiang's tightly knitted brows had completely relaxed, and her mouth babbled a yellow plum tune. "Miss, you're not worried anymore?" Tao Hong asked with a smile. "What do I have to worry about? Even if the sky falls, there are tall people to hold it up. If he can't even withstand this little pressure, then he should just forget about plucking a delicate flower like me." Yu Xiang wrinkled her nose and snorted. "That's true." Tao Hong nodded in agreement. Lulu didn't have such a good attitude, and said worriedly, "Today, old madam didn't let Miss acknowledge your ancestors no matter what. I'm afraid she treats Miss as her own granddaughter. If she knew that Miss and Master Ho, she definitely wouldn't be able to accept it. She might even hate Miss." After planting the seeds, Yu Xiang used a small ladle to scoop water, and casually replied, "It doesn't matter. I'll be filial to her in the future. After all, she's my ancestor. How could she hate me for the rest of her life? She's the most soft-hearted. When the time comes, I'll give birth to 8 or 10 great-grandchildren for her. Let's see if she still has the strength to be angry with me." You see, Yu Miaoqi caused him no Kazdar family to be ruined. After he became the top scholar, he never thought of taking revenge on her. It can be seen that he has a very noble character. Since you're so anxious to meet him, why don't I go report to the old ancestor now and have her send you back? Then I'll go and propose marriage. Yu Pinyin pressed his whole body on his sister's body, and nibbled on her slender neck as he spoke. Yu Xiang immediately cowered. She hugged her brother's thin waist and said in a low voice, "Don't go, don't go. It's almost the end of the year. Let's let the old ancestor have a good new year first. We'll talk about the matter of meeting him next year." Yu Pinyin didn't answer. He kissed her from her neck to her collarbone, leaving a few bright red marks on it. Yu Xiang moaned. Her cheeks flushed uncontrollably and her eyes were wet. She looked like a kitten craving for its owner's love. Yu Pinyin's eyes darkened. He lifted her blouse with his big hands and forcefully kneaded her smooth, round shoulders. His breath was as hot as fire. Right at this moment, Tao Hong walked in carelessly with a pot of tea in her hands. Seeing the two people entangled together, she screamed in fear and then ran away. Fortunately, she was very professional and didn't smash the teapot as well. Yu Pinyin rolled over and sat up. He carefully adjusted his sister's collar and used his thumb to scrape her seductive cleavage. He panted and said, "I just said that she was a good girl, but in the blink of an eye, she's become a fool." When Yu Xiang heard this, she laughed and collapsed on the bed. Lulu chased after Tao Hong. She took the tea tray and cautiously knocked on the door. She only entered when she heard permission. After pouring tea for the two masters, she took out a small delicate medicine bottle and reminded, "Miss, it's time to massage and apply medicine." Yu Xiang's legs had to be massaged once a day to maintain muscle activity. Because Tao Hong was very strong, she usually did this work. However, she was scared away today, so Lulu had to take over. Unexpectedly, Master Ho took the medicine bottle and said, "Let me do it. You can leave first." Lulu stood stiffly and refused to leave. "Marquis, you have to roll up the young Miss trousers when you massage her. That's why I shouldn't look at indecent things." Yu Pinyin smiled and looked at her. "I was the one who massaged Xiang'er's legs before she was 14 years old. Do you think I don't know?" Lulu looked at Master Ho's cold face and burning eyes, then looked at her heartless masters. She had no choice but to bow and leave. The room was heated, and there were two braziers by the bed. The temperature was like that of a warm spring day. It was very pleasant. Yu Xiang was only wearing a short skirt and a light smock. She had already taken off the white stockings on her feet. Her 10 small round pink toes were slightly curled up. She looked extremely cute. Because the area below her knees was completely numb, her jade feet were more delicate and small than other people's. When gently held, they were not even half the size of a palm. Yu Pinyin rubbed her white and tender instep with one hand and kneaded her round toes with the other. He loved it so much that he didn't want to let go. After kneading enough, he put her two little feet together and lowered his head to kiss each of them. Yu Xiang was happy in her heart, but her mouth refused to let him go. She pretended to be angry and said, "If my legs could move, I would definitely kick your teeth out. Let's see if you can take advantage of me again." Yu Pinyin laughed in a deep voice. "You call this taking advantage of me? It's still early." Yu Xiang was wearing a pair of light yellow bloomers under her short skirt. The trousers were tied with a ribbon with a bow. It looked very delicate and cute. Yu Pinyin said as he untied the bow and pushed the trousers up to her thighs. His smile gradually faded, but his eyes seemed to be burning with two balls of fire. They were astonishingly bright. It had only been a year, and his little sister had grown a lot. Her legs were straighter and longer than he remembered, and they were also smoother like jade. Placed on the quilt embroidered with golden camellias, it made her white and creamy skin look like melted mutton fat. It made people want to take a bite and taste the seductive taste. For a moment, Yu Pinyin almost forgot how to breathe. However, he quickly adjusted himself. He poured the herbal essential oil from the medicine bottle into his palm and rubbed it evenly. He massaged his little sister's thighs inch by inch until he reached the hideous scar on her kneecap. His mind was no longer filled with any romantic thoughts. He asked in a hoarse voice, "Do you feel anything here?" "No." Yu Xiang shook her head with an indifferent expression. He continued to massage her calves. Every time he pressed an inch, he would ask if she felt anything, but all he got in return was a shake of the head. When he finally massaged her toes, his face was very gloomy. He said firmly, "Xiang'er, don't worry. Brother will definitely find Master Ku Hui to treat your legs." Yu Xiang had been paralyzed for 2 lifetimes, so he was already used to it. Moreover, in this lifetime it was only her calves that were numb. She could even turn over and sit up on her own, so she was very indifferent. "We haven't been able to find him for 5 years. Maybe Master Kuhui met with an accident while crossing the sea. She seemed to realize that these words were equivalent to a curse, so she hurriedly put her hands together and chanted, Umitba. Yu Pinyin poured some essential oil and prepared to massage her feet a second time. His voice was cold as he said, if he's dead, then I'll kidnap Dr. Piao and bring him here. Isn't he stubborn? I'll give him all 33,600 types of torture. Let's see if he's still stubborn or not. Yu Xiang silently lit a candle for Dr. Piao and comforted her. Don't. Dr. Piao is called keep him alive. Even His Majesty is counting on him to keep him alive. You must not do that. We'll search for another year. If we can't find him, then forget it. In any case, I'll stay at home all day and you'll carry me wherever I go. It doesn't really matter if I can walk or not. Yu Pinyin lowered his head and focused on massaging her feet. He didn't reply and his expression couldn't be seen clearly. Yu Xiang was afraid that he would really cause trouble for Dr. Piao, so she had no choice but to change the topic. Speaking of which, until I was 14 years old, it was Gij who massaged my legs. Gij's skills are countless times better than Tao Hong's. Why did he suddenly stop massaging me? Yu Pinyin finally raised his head. His deep eyes were filled with lingering love, and his voice was especially deep and hoarse, because after the last massage Gij went back to have wet dreams. He could see but couldn't eat, so he simply stopped looking. If these words, which were full of teasing and erotic meaning, were heard by an ordinary girl, they would be embarrassed to death. However, Yu Xiang was thick-skinned. At first she was a little shy, but after she got used to it she was even more open than Yu Pinyin. In her previous life she had never been in contact with the opposite sex other than her twin brother, so naturally she had never been in a relationship. Now that she experienced this sweet feeling she couldn't stop. She treated it as a secret realm and kept exploring it. When she heard these words, her bright eyes were filled with self-satisfaction. She used her index finger to point at her slightly pouted red lips and said seductively, "You like me that much? Then why don't you come and kiss me?" Yu Pinyin chuckled softly. He was aroused by her straightforwardness and her unreserved nature. If the first half of his life was filled with misery and killing, then the bright and beautiful little woman in front of him was the only light and sweetness in his dark and gloomy life. He slowly approached her and opened his mouth to suck on her pink and glossy red lips. However, the red lips retreated the moment before they touched. What's wrong? His Adam's apple moved. He was very thirsty. Let's change the way we kiss. Yu Xiang pushed her brother's handsome face away and looked left and right. She picked up a long strip of malt candy placed on the plate and bit it between her teeth. She said vaguely, "Come and kiss me." This was the first time in her 2 lifetimes that she had been in a relationship. She was like a child who had gotten a new toy and was constantly looking for more fun ways to play. Not only did she have all kinds of strange requests when they were together, she could even play hundreds of different ways when they kissed. Yu Pinyin loved her shameless personality, but he really didn't know how to kiss her through the malt candy. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he asked, "You have something in your mouth. How do you want your brother to kiss you?" "I'll bite this end and you bite the other end. We'll bite and bite until we kiss." "Why are you so stupid?" Yu Xiang said as she poked his mouth with the malt candy in her mouth. Yu Pinyin felt as if he had just been enlightened, or as if he had just eaten a few 100 kilograms of jokes. While laughing, he bit down on her lips. In the end, he bit down on her delicate lips. The sweetness that was different from usual exploded on the tip of their tongues. In an instant, countless fireworks bloomed in his mind. Yu Pinyin's eyes were dark red. He pinched his sister's slender waist hard. He couldn't wait to swallow her with this incomparably sweet taste. After the kiss, Yu Xiang hugged his neck and kept asking, "Is it sweet? Is it sweet?" Chapter 108. After sending off the Lin clan, Yu Xiang and Yu Siyu became the joint head of the household. The Marquis household finally returned to its former tranquility. After all, the 4 etiquette instructors came from the palace. They were afraid that the Empress would forget them if they stayed too long. Seeing that Yu Miaoqi was much more well-behaved, they hurriedly bid farewell. Before they left, they held 500 volumes of women's precepts, which Yu Miaoqi copied every day. Since then, Yu Miaoqi often left the Fu, saying that she was going to visit the Lin clan. She seemed to have recovered from a series of blows. Not only was her complexion rosy, even her eyes were full of vigor. Especially after visiting the Lin clan, she could greet people with a smile for several days in a row. Yu Xiang sent people to follow her. Seeing that she didn't come out after entering the Lin residence, he slowly let down his guard. It was a rare sunny day. The golden sunlight dispelled the biting cold wind, and the air was filled with the fragrance of blooming plum blossoms. Yu Pinyin was on break. At this moment he was standing behind his desk and painting. He was painting a picture of plum blossoms blooming proudly in the snow. Yu Xiang was lying on the soft couch across from him. She was holding a supernatural novel and reading it with great interest. Yu Pinyin lost interest after touching a few plum blossoms. He threw the paper to the side and took out another one. He looked at his sister carefully. Yu Xiang sensed his focused gaze. She put down the book and asked, "Are you painting me?" "Don't move." Yu Pinyin carefully mixed the ink. Yu Xiang blinked. She seemed to have thought of something. She quickly took off the pearl hairpin in her hair and undid her hair, letting her ankle-length hair fall. Then she arranged her legs into a graceful posture of lying on her side and crossing her legs. She took off her white stockings, revealing her small and exquisite jade feet. One hand hung naturally at her waist, and the other hand rested on her cheek. She smiled brightly. "Paint me like this." After saying this, she felt that it was still a bit imperfect. After thinking for a bit, she took off her blouse to her elbows, revealing her white and smooth shoulders. Yu Pinyin's hand that was holding the pen tightened unconsciously. With a crisp crack, the pen broke into two pieces. Yu Pinyin's hand suddenly tightened around the pen. Yu Pinyin held his forehead helplessly. He threw the pen out of the window and walked over quickly. His deep voice revealed a strong desire. "Xianger, how do you want me to draw you like this? Right now I just want to kiss you." As he spoke, his lips moved closer and closer. "Then let's draw after we kiss. Draw my red and swollen lips." Yu Xiang giggled and stuck out her tongue to lick her brother's thin and beautiful lips. Yu Pinyin didn't know that his sister would be so passionate after confessing her feelings. There was a driveway built around the mountain and a plank path used by woodcutters. It took an hour to walk by the driveway and 2 hours to walk by the plank path. Moreover, one had to walk up a steep staircase and kneel 3 times and kowtow 9 times. One could imagine how difficult it was. Even if Yu Pinyin was made of iron, he would not be able to withstand the torment. The imperial bodyguards standing on both sides could not help but draw their swords. Ku Hui closed his eyes and recited Buddhist scriptures in a low voice. Yu Pinyin waved his hand and ordered the imperial bodyguards to put away their swords. He cupped his hands and said, "Great master, then it's a deal." Then he hurried down the mountain. When he returned to the Marquis household, he did not tell anyone. He watched his younger sister fall asleep and quietly left when she lay on her side until midnight. Wearing only a snow-white unlined garment, he slowly walked up the mountain from the foot of the mountain with 3 kneels and 9 kowtows. Unknowingly, the dark sky faintly glowed with white light. His hair was covered with morning dew that condensed into ice beads. The fabric around his knees was torn because of the friction, revealing his bruised kneecaps. The imperial bodyguards following behind him were already in tears. They kept saying, "Master Ho, let your subordinates come down." However, he turned a deaf ear to them. When the sun rose, they finally arrived in front of Zhenghua Temple. However, Ku Hui refused to see them. He only sent a young novice monk and said, "Benefactor, your killing is too heavy and your sins cannot be washed away. Please continue tomorrow." "What did you say, bald donkey?" The imperial bodyguards were furious and drew their swords. However, Yu Pinyin only waved his hand and calmly got up. No matter how many times Ku Hui wanted him to kneel, even if he had to grind down all the steps on the plank walkway, he must cure his younger sister. "Master Ho, forget it." One of the imperial bodyguards gritted his teeth and growled. If he was tormented like this every day, would Master Ho still need his legs? Yu Pinyin suddenly turned his head, his eyes bloodshot. This marquis doesn't want to hear this a second time. This matter concerned Xiang Er's life. How could he just let it go like this? The imperial bodyguards were swept by his murderous gaze and immediately kept quiet out of fear. However, a clear voice came from behind him. That's right. Forget it. Xiang Er, why are you here? Yu Pinyin wanted to go forward to greet her, but his stiff legs wouldn't listen to him. Yu Xiang arrived in front of him after being pushed by Tao Hong's Lulu. She raised her head and looked at him. Suddenly, she reached out and grabbed his lapel, pulling him to kneel on the ground. There was a dull thud that made everyone's teeth hurt. The imperial bodyguard's eyes were filled with resentment, but they didn't dare to say anything. It didn't matter if they offended Master Ho, but if they offended Miss Xiang Er, no one would be able to bear the consequences. Who didn't know that Miss Xiang Er was Master Ho's lifeblood? Yu Xiang stroked the side of his face that was covered in stubbles. Her smile was bright and strange. Does it hurt? Without waiting for her brother to answer, she continued. My heart hurts more than your knees. If I have to use your legs to cure my legs, then I might as well be paralyzed for the rest of my life. If you come back tomorrow, I'll personally remove my legs. Do you believe me? She took out a dagger from a hidden compartment in the armrest of the wheelchair and forcefully cut her kneecap. The warm blood immediately dyed a large patch of her thick skirt red. Tao Hong's Lulu was so frightened that he cried out. The imperial bodyguards were also stunned and astonished. They all thought in unison, no wonder Master Ho dotes on Miss Three so much. It turns out that Miss Three would even give up her own life for Master Ho. It's really intolerable if I don't treat her well. Yu Xiang's movements were too fast. In addition, her body was stiff from kneeling all night. Yu Pinyin didn't manage to stop her in time. He snatched the dagger from her hand and angrily roared, What are you doing? Are you crazy? Are you feeling sorry for me? Can you understand how I feel when I see you kneeling on the ground? Yu Xiang scratched her wound and made more blood flow. She tearfully ordered, You come back with me right now. You're not allowed to come back in the future. Do you hear me? Otherwise, I'll completely destroy your legs. As she spoke, she pushed away Tao Hong and Lulu, who were trying to bandage her wound. Yu Pinyin couldn't do anything to her. He could only tear off his clothes and bandage her bleeding wound. He compromised and said, I hear you. Let's go home now. Yu Xiang was satisfied. She forcefully pinched the flesh on the back of his hand and then raised her voice to shout into the Zhengguo temple, Ku Hui, listen to me. You want my brother to lay down his butcher's knife and wash away the sins of killing. Who knows how many people of the great Han dynasty would be caught in the flames of war and blood would flow like rivers if he didn't fight hard to protect the country. Without him punishing the corrupt officials, how many people would be wronged and wouldn't have a door to heaven or to hell? He single-handedly protected the lives of millions of people. Whether what he did was a sin of killing or good deeds, the Buddha will decide. It's not up to you to judge. Moreover, I'm the one who broke my leg. I'm also the one who's seeking medical treatment. Whether you want to save me or not is all up to you. What does it have to do with my brother? If you don't see your past all day, you'll cut off your path to becoming a sage. If you talk about your past all day, you'll hurt the harmony of heaven and earth. Ku Hui, you'll cut off your path to becoming a sage and hurt the harmony of heaven and earth. No matter how many good deeds you do in the future and how much suffering you suffer, it won't make up for it. Go back to Tianju and cultivate for a few more decades. After saying this, she waved at the imperial bodyguards and said, Carry your Master Ho onto the carriage. The imperial bodyguards complied and hurriedly carried their master onto the carriage that had been waiting for a long time by the roadside. Just as Yu Xiang was carried onto the carriage by Tao Hong and Lulu, Ku Hui walked out quickly and shouted, Benefactor, please wait. Yu Xiang's words were like a knife stabbing into his heart, making him feel ashamed and regretful. How could Yu Xiang stay when her brother's kneecap was injured to such an extent? She sternly scolded the coachman to quickly leave. When she turned the carriage around, she lifted the curtain and gave the embarrassed Ku Hui the middle finger. What's the meaning of this? Ku Hui looked on helplessly as the carriage drove away. He turned his head and asked his senior martial brother who had followed him out. Ku Hai rubbed his bald head and guessed. It probably means that your cultivation level isn't high enough. Otherwise, she would have given you a thumbs up. Junior martial brother, you've been painstakingly cultivating in Tianzhu for 5 years. Do you still not understand? There are Buddhas everywhere in the world. All living beings are Buddhas. You shouldn't judge people with evil thoughts, and you shouldn't reject people because of anger. These past few years of cultivation have been wasted. Moreover, didn't you painstakingly study medicine to help the world and save the people? Why can't you save benefactor you? You're too narrow-minded. Senior martial brother is right. Junior martial brother is ashamed. But now that things have come to this, what should we do? Ku Hui smiled bitterly. I'll immediately send the young novice monk to deliver an invitation to benefactor you. For my sake, I'm sure she'll come back. Ku Hai put his palms together and chanted Amitabha. Chapter 109. Yu Xiang anxiously led her brother back to the small courtyard. First she treated her wound. Luckily it wasn't deep, so the bleeding stopped very quickly after she applied some medicine. Moreover, it showed signs of healing. Yu Pinyin reached out several times to help her bandage her wound, but she fiercely pushed him away. Her expression was full of disgust. Tao Hong was carrying a basin of hot water, while Lulu was using a cloth towel to carefully wipe the bruises on Master Ho's knees. Tell them to heat up the fire. Big brother's face is pale from the cold. Can't you see? Yu Xiang put a pile of medicine on the bedside table and climbed onto the soft couch with her arms propped up. Yu Pinyin hurriedly pulled her into his arms, but she fiercely pinched his arm. You kneel when others tell you to. Do you still have any dignity? Don't you know that men have gold under their knees? If something bad happens to you, what do you want me to do? As Yu Xiang spoke, her tears came out again. Her thick eyelashes were covered with sparkling tears. Seeing this, Yu Pinyin's heart throbbed with pain. Good girl, don't cry. Big brother has been practicing martial arts since he was young. It's just a kneel. It's not as serious as you say. Yu Pinyin rubbed her earlobe, trying to change the topic. What do you mean? He raised his middle finger. What the F***ck? Yu Xiang's anger rose from her heart. Yu Pinyin was stunned. After a short while, he used his finger to rub his sister's lips. His tone was very helpless. How can a girl be so rude? You're not allowed to do this gesture again. Don't worry. I've only done this to Ku Hui. I'm so angry that I'm dizzy. She threw herself into her brother's arms, holding him and gently rocking him. After a while, she let go and focused on applying medicine to him. Yu Pinyin didn't feel any pain. On the other hand, Yu Xiang was grimacing and gasping from time to time. Yu Pinyin wanted to laugh, but he also felt his heart burning. His eyes were glued to her face and he couldn't look away. After applying the medicine, Yu Xiang pressed her brother down, covered him with the quilt, and ordered him to quickly go to sleep. However, she saw Tao Hong running in with a letter. Miss Master Ku Hai sent you a letter. Quickly take a look. Yu Pinyin quickly took the post and read it. He smiled happily. Master Ku Hai invites you to come up the mountain tomorrow. I think Master Ku Hui has already agreed to treat your leg. Yu Xiang snatched the invitation and crumpled it into a ball. He said coldly, I'm not going. If I go, who knows what other tests await you. Yu Pinyin hugged her and whispered, let's go. We should at least go and take a look. If you go with me, it won't be as simple as just taking a look. If they ask you to go through a mountain of swords or a sea of fire, you'll probably agree. I'm not going. I'm fine like this. Wherever I go, I have you hugging me. No one is more comfortable than me. Today, however, she only curled her lips and her face was full of disdain. It was as if the matriarch was just an ant to her. She could obliterate her with a flick of her finger. Yu Xiang immediately sensed that something was amiss. She discreetly sized her up. Ever since the Lin clan left, Yu Miaoqi had practically lived with her tail between her legs. It had been a long time since she had such a confident appearance. Did she find a way out? Or did she have a stronger backer than her older brother? Thinking of the plot in the original work where Yu Miaoqi ascended to the position of empress, Yu Xiang's heart trembled. While she was thinking, the carriage arrived at the entrance of Zhonggua Temple. Ku Hai and Ku Hui personally came to greet them. The group of people sat down in a simple but imposing meditation room. Ku Hai immediately apologized to the siblings on behalf of his junior brother. Yu Xiang waved her hand and said in a mocking tone, "The fault does not lie with Master Ku Hai. We don't dare to accept this apology. Amitabha Buddha, the fault lies with this poor monk. Benefactor Yu, please forgive this one." Ku Hui immediately sat up and sincerely clasped his hands to apologize. Yu Xiang stared straight at him and sneered, "This is Master Ku Hui? What a young man. It's said that monks are merciful, so how can Master Ku Hui be so cold-blooded and heartless? On this mountain, there are believers who kneel 3 times and kowtow 9 times when they come to make a pilgrimage. They do it with hot blood and sincerity. It's the purest and most supreme faith that comes from the depths of their hearts. However, Master Ku Hui personally blasphemed this faith by forcing my older brother to kneel on the mountain peak in the dead of winter. If my older brother hadn't practiced martial arts since he was a child and had a strong body, I'm afraid his legs would have been crippled. I'd like to ask, is Master Ku Hui a Buddha or an Asura? How could he harm my older brother to this extent? Although my older brother's hands are indeed stained with blood, he has protected the country and punished traitors. The number of people he has saved is not limited to just tens of thousands. I'd like to ask Master Ku Hui again. You've cultivated for more than 20 years. Can you save more people than my older brother? If not, what qualifications do you have to convert him?" These words were truly sarcastic. Every sentence hit the nail on the head, but no one could refute them. Ku Hai's expression was solemn and her eyes were filled with shame. Ku Hui couldn't even raise his head. Amitabha Buddha, this poor monk knows his mistake. Benefactor's legs will be treated by this poor monk. This poor monk will definitely do his best. He was silent for a long time, but in the end, he prostrated himself on the ground. Yu Xiang still wasn't willing to let it go, but her left and right hands were held back by old Madam and Yu Pinyin. Everyone was in an uproar, thinking that Master Ku Hai's face-reading technique was indeed accurate. Not only was Yu Miaoqi ashamed to death, but even old Madam felt ashamed. She could only push her granddaughter forward and say, "Xiang'er, you also picked the lot." Everyone in the capital knew that Yu Xiang had picked the lot king. When they saw her come forward, they immediately stopped the clamor and stared at her hand as she spun the lot pot. Just like last time, Yu Xiang didn't wait for the lot to fall to the ground. She casually picked up the lot king in the air. When she looked at it, she was stunned. Master Ku Hai laughed and said, "Amitabha, Benefactor Yu Xiang is indeed fated with Buddha. Good, good." Chapter 110. The next day, Ku Hui arrived at the Marquis household as promised. He held Yu Xiang's wrist and carefully checked his pulse. A quarter of an hour later, seeing his thoughtful expression, the matriarch asked somewhat anxiously, "Great Master, can Xiang'er's leg be treated?" Ku Hui did not answer. Instead, he bent down to take off Yu Xiang's embroidered shoes, but Yu Pinyin forcefully grabbed his wrist. Facing his cold gaze, even though Ku Hui had been worshipping Buddha since he was 2 years old, he still felt shaken and cold. He hurriedly explained, "Benefactor Yu, this penniless monk only wants to take a look at Benefactor Yu Xiang's wound. Only then can it help with the diagnosis. Men and women should not touch each other." Yu Pinyin warned him word by word. Ku Hui smiled bitterly. "Benefactor Yu is thinking too much. This penniless monk only sees patients, not men and women. The 4 most basic methods of diagnosis are looking, listening, questioning, and feeling the pulse. If you don't allow this penniless monk to examine the wound, I'm afraid there will be a deviation in the treatment of Benefactor Yu Xiang." Yu Pinyin frowned and slowly let go. Ku Hui glanced at his slightly red and swollen wrist and could only shake his head and smile bitterly. Although Yu Xiang had lived in the Great Han Dynasty for 5 years, he was still a modern man. He did not place much importance on the separation between men and women. While the two were arguing, he had automatically taken off his embroidered shoes and rolled up his trousers. He pointed at his knee and said, "Look, that year a knife cut across my kneecap. This is the scar." The scar was very long. When it was cut down diagonally, it actually chopped off both of his legs. Although 5 years had passed, the hideous scar was still faintly visible. What a bloody scene it was at that time. The matriarch lowered her head and wiped her tears. Yu Pinyan's expression was gloomy. Yu Siyu and Yu Miaoqi were so scared that they turned their heads away, not daring to look. Ku Hui smiled at Yu Xiang. Only then did he crouch down and repeatedly examine the wound. He even used his fingers to massage it and then used a small hammer to hit the kneecap. Seeing this, Yu Xiang could not help but laugh. This monk was quite professional. After the examination, Ku Hui straightened up and sat in front of the table to write down the prescription. Yu Pinyan helped his sister pull up her trousers and put on her embroidered shoes. He asked, "Master, can my sister's legs be treated?" Ku Hui answered without raising his head. "There's still treatment. Thanks to the medicinal oil you used to massage her legs for the past 5 years, the meridians in her legs were preserved." After he finished writing the prescription and handed it to Lulu, he looked embarrassed. "This poor monk is 70% sure that I can cure her, but I need to break her legs and reconnect them. I need to apply the bone-healing ointment that I developed in recent years externally. After 2 months of applying it together with acupuncture, benefactor Yu Xiang may be able to stand up again." "What? You actually want to break his leg?" The old lady held her forehead and almost fainted. Yu Pinyan's face was so gloomy that water could drip from it. He stared at Ku Hui with a gaze that was like a boneless steel knife. He wanted nothing more than to skin him alive. What kind of torture was it to break his leg and reattach it? Not to mention that Xianger was spoiled since childhood. Even a strong man with rough skin and thick flesh wouldn't be able to withstand it. Yu Siyu was so scared that her face turned white. She turned her head slightly and saw that Yu Miaoqi was covering her mouth and laughing. Ku Hui felt his scalp go numb from Yu Pinyan's stare. But in order to cure the illness, he had to repeat himself. "That's right. You need to break her legs from the kneecaps and then reattach them. This is the so-called without breaking there can be no construction. After breaking there can be construction." As the person involved, Yu Xiang's expression was the calmest. She didn't say a word. She took out a handkerchief from her sleeve, folded it into a strip, and stuffed it into her mouth. Then she lifted her legs and placed them on the table. She said vaguely, "Come on. Be more nimble. Don't break my legs the first time. If you do it a second time or a third time, I'll go crazy and scold you." Ku Hui never expected that such a delicate girl would have such courage and insight. She even surpassed her grandmother and brother. Although he admired her greatly, he couldn't help but laugh. He waved his hand and said, "Benefactor Yu Xiang, you don't need to be like this. I have a medicine here called mefizin. After you drink it, you'll fall into a deep sleep. When you wake up, your legs will have been reattached and the medicine will have been applied. You really don't need to endure the pain of your broken bones. Why didn't you tell me earlier that you had mefizin?" Yu Xiang spat out the handkerchief and rejoiced. Yu Pinyan's heartstrings suddenly relaxed. He placed his hands on his younger sister's shoulders and forcefully squeezed them. Ku Hui didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He handed the prescription to the maidservant and ordered her to boil it immediately. About half an hour later, Yu Xiang had fallen asleep with her head tilted to the side. The matriarch and her 2 granddaughters were waiting outside the door. Ku Hui wiped his palms with strong wine. However, he saw that Yu Pinyan was also dipping her hands into the wine jar. Her expression was very grave and stern. "Benefactor Yu, what are you?" He originally thought that as a relative, Commandant Yu definitely wouldn't be able to do it. "I'll do it. You just need to guide me from the side." This matter concerned his younger sister's life. Even if his heart was beating wildly, his blood was flowing in reverse, and even his fingertips were beginning to tremble. He still wouldn't leave his younger sister's safety in the hands of an outsider. Ku Hui obeyed and retreated to the side. He pointed at Daoba's location and said, "Start breaking the bones here. Remember, the smoother the fracture, the better." Yu Pinyin nodded and secretly took a deep breath. Then he stretched out his hand and pinched and twisted. With 2 crisp cracking sounds, the bones had already broken. Ku Hui hurriedly stepped forward and used his finger to examine the fracture. The fracture was very neat, as if it had been cut by a sharp blade. The strength and technique were truly exquisite. Good, very good. Now, I'll reconnect benefactor Yuxiang's dislocated bones and apply bone healing ointment. She'll be able to stand up in 2 or 3 months. Ku Hui quickly set the bones and then applied the black ointment to Yuxiang's slightly swollen kneecap. Yu Pinyin slowly walked out of the hall and spat out a mouthful of turbid air towards the gloomy sky. His hands were stained with so much blood. For the first time, he actually felt lucky for his skillful killing techniques. At least with him doing it, he could reduce his younger sister's pain to a minimum. Seeing him come out, the old lady hurriedly asked, "How is it? Has the bone been reconnected?" "It's been reconnected." As soon as Yu Pinyin's voice fell, he felt a sharp pain in his kneecap. It wasn't because of yesterday's kneeling, but because he felt the same pain as his younger sister. If he could, he wished he could take her place. Amiba. With Buddha's blessing, Xiang'er will definitely recover. She's very lucky. The old lady clasped her hands together and chanted. Ku Hai finished applying the ointment and promised to come back 3 days later to change the bandages. Then he bid farewell and left. Yuxiang didn't wake up until midnight. When she opened her eyes, she saw her older brother lying on his side beside her. His eyes were faintly bloodshot. "Brother, have you been watching over me all day?" Yuxiang reached out to touch his cheek. However, because the ointment had worn off, her legs hurt so much that she trembled. Yu Pinyin hurriedly held her cold fingertips and said anxiously, "What's wrong with Xiang'er? Is it starting to hurt again?" "Wait a moment. Master Ku Hui left a few painkillers. I'll go get them now." "No, let it hurt." Yuxiang grabbed his sleeve and forced a smile. "Pain is a good thing. It's been 5 years and it's finally feeling something again. I want to experience it properly." Yu Pinyin's eyes were sorrowful. He slowly lay back beside her and wiped away the fine beads of cold sweat on her forehead. He rubbed her little head in his arms and sighed silently. Yuxiang rubbed against his warm chest longingly. Then she raised her head and pointed at her pale lips. She pleaded, "Kiss me and hug me. It won't hurt anymore."